the hospital room where Yu Jinho was currently admitted to. A humanoid shape rose up from the blob of shadow sneaking into the hospital room. It was Baru, who swapped locations with Jin Woo via shadow exchange. He reached out to heal Yu Jinho, as ordered by his liege. From the tip of his hands, gentle blue light slowly spread out in this darkened room. Yu Jinho's expression, scrunched up from pain and discomfort, softened in no time at all. Seoul, the capital city of South Korea. There was a 14-hour difference between here and the eastern United States. It may have been in the middle of the night over there, but it was in the morning in Korea. Oh my king, how long should I stay in this position? I guess, until Baru reports back to me that he's done with Jinho's treatment. Perhaps the knight recognized his faults in this matter because he kept his mouth shut and maintained the once-embalming raid posture. Jin Woo wordlessly stared at the knight before his gaze abruptly landed on his hands. The back of his hands were all messed up. There were several bruises and he could spot traces of blood as well. That Thomas Andre, he was truly one nonsensically sturdy dude. Just from Jin Woo beating the living crap out of him, his hands ended up getting bruised to this degree. Of course, such wounds would be gone without a trace after a good night's rest, all thanks to the passive buff, good health and long life. The knight, staying quiet for a while, suddenly addressed Jin Woo again. Oh my king, what is it? Please, bestow unto me a new name, my king. Jin Woo shifted his gaze over to his brand new shadow soldier. Knight Commander grade. Right, I guess you also need a name, don't you? Jin Woo pondered this dilemma for a little bit before forming a wry smile as he spoke. Since you died because of your greed, how about I call you Greed? Next day, on their way to the conference venue, Adam White explained the current situation. We have secured the testimonies of Hunter H. Wang Dong-su's accomplices. The Bureau will soon release a statement containing the full account of what happened. He then went and strongly emphasized that Hunter Nim would not be inconvenienced in any shape or form. It was a welcome piece of news for Jin Woo, of course. The reason why he decided to travel to the States had to do with the monster possessing the appearance of his father. He wished to gather information through the International Guild Conference. The moment Jin Woo stepped into the lobby of the venue, the conversations and welcoming greetings being shared among the crowd all came to a sudden halt. Gazes of curiosity and fear came flying at him from pretty much all directions. He was that Asian hunter responsible for utterly destroying Thomas Andre, who had been reigning over other hunters like a king. Quite a few hunters kept whispering the stories related to Jin Woo even now, but none of them dared to approach him, because they still didn't know why he went and wrecked the Scavenger Guild to that extent. Seriously now, what if the reason for that unholy mass beatdown turned out to be nothing more than Thomas Andre staring at him for too long? If so, wouldn't one get marked for death simply by trying to say hello to Jin Woo? Even though all these people were ace hunters that subjugated scary monsters for a living, they found it hard to meet Jin Woo's gaze right now. After the cordial lunch prepared by the Hunter Bureau came to an end, the participating hunters began filling up the seats facing the rostrum in the conference venue. Afterwards, the conference got going, and several topics were discussed. Unfortunately, none of those really warranted Jin Woo's complete attention nor his sustained interest. Most of the things being talked about were similar in nature to status updates and so on. If only Jinho was here, I'd not be this bored. All Jin Woo could do was to wake up his superhuman patience and wait until the topic he might be interested in came around. Quite a while later, although it was not the information he was waiting for, a topic did manage to grab his attention. Everyone, you should be aware of the fact that the number of gates being generated has shot up recently, and the fact that stronger monsters have made their appearances, too. Initially, it sounded like something everyone knew only too well. However, there should be almost none of you who have realized that unusual activity has been detected in the skies above us. The scientist named Belzer emphasized the word skies, and the hunters finally began showing signs of interest. Of course, Jin Woo was included among those hunters, as well. The truth of the magical energy concentration found in the planet's atmosphere getting greater. We all know of this fact since it has been widely reported. Now that he was being showered with the interested gazes of the hunters, the clearly happy scientist carried on. I'd like to use a different term to denote the magic energy found in our atmosphere, until another more suitable word is invented. How about we use the term Magisphere? The scientist gestured with his hand, and a huge map was displayed on the screen behind him. It was the atlas of the world that contained all of the continents, no, all of the countries existing on this planet. Did you know that the Magosphere has begun gathering and concentrating on the skies of several nations at present? There are a total of 9 spots in the world where the Magosphere has begun gathering into a large mass. My purpose today is to reveal the locations of the 9 spots. Dr. Belzer then calmly read off the names of the 9 countries on his list. Province of Alberta, Canada. And finally, this is the spot with the highest Magosphere concentration. City of Seoul, South Korea. The moment those translated words of the scientist came out from the earpiece, Jin-Woo wore, for some reason, every single hunter sitting inside the venue shifted their gazes in his direction all at once. I've also read this morning's article, but folks, you shouldn't be looking at Seong Hunter Nim that way. If he was capable of causing all this Magosphere in the air like that, then obviously, he's no longer a hunter, is he? As you might have guessed, we couldn't discover any tangible similarities between the locations I have mentioned. Since there were no similarities, it was hard to figure out the cause for this change. And since there was also no precedence, it was equally as hard to tell what might happen next. Is it related somehow to the number of the sovereigns? Because there are 9 of them. To call it a mere coincidence, it just left that vague uncool aftertaste in his mouth. And also, now that the King of Giants was slain by him, that number 9 should not hold significance anymore. The scientist's lengthy presentation was about to come to its conclusion. However, let me make it clear. The assertion of being unable to respond does not mean there is no need to make plans. It's eminently possible that our world will experience yet another seismic shift soon. As the conference was drawing to a close, the director of the Hunter Bureau took to the stage. His reason? To make an important announcement. Since this wasn't in the schedule, hunters naturally became noisy from his unexpected entrance. I have something important I must inform you about, everyone. My heart is heavy as I deliver this unfortunate news to you all. Finally, Jin-Woo sensed that the moment he was waiting for had finally arrived. The director spoke in a low, gloomy voice. The director brought up the relevant information on the giant screen behind him. First, the remnants of flames that didn't want to die out, the ashes of the mansion. And then, Christopher Reed's dead body with a hole in his chest. Hunters confirmed the death of the Special Authority rank awakened via the provided video footage as well as the several still images on the screen, and reacted by gasping out in shocked moans. Not one person present was able to dispute the fact of that man being dead now. As expected, the surprised hunters began their outpouring of questions, but the director firmly shook his head. Instead, I'm sorry, but I'll answer your questions only after this presentation comes to an end. There was a far more important matter still to be carried out instead of answering the questions. We strongly suspect this man is the perpetrator of this crime. A man's face now filled up the entirety of that giant screen. Almost immediately, the gathered hunters realized that something was amiss. That Asian man's face, wasn't it uncannily similar to someone else sitting inside this conference venue? But then, these hunters also recalled what happened to Thomas Andre, and none of them could voice the thoughts bubbling up inside their minds. Jin-Woo too closed shut his mouth. The photograph must have been taken moments after he had arrived at the Hunter Bureau for identification purposes. That face definitely belonged to his old man from his memories no matter how many times he took a look. Jin-Woo eventually bit his lower lip. How come it's my father? Dungeons were supposedly the territory of the rulers. He couldn't tell why they sent a monster with the outer appearance of his father. Regardless of what their intentions were, though, Jin-Woo could still feel the bubbling pit of rage slowly building up its intensity deep within his heart. Too bad. Hunters nearby completely mistook that rage for something else and they did their absolute best to not look at his way. Do not look back. Do not look back. They just look similar, that's all. Just similar and nothing else. Asians all look alike, right? Right. But still, that is just so. The director branded Seong-il Hwan as Suspect S and began explaining who this man was, from where he was discovered, what happened during that discovery, and finally, what transpired afterwards. Hunters were taken by yet another surprise from the revelation that this person actually defeated Hwang Dong-soo during the interrogation to make his escape. Just who was Hwang Dong-soo? The Hunter Bureau acknowledged his powers early on and offered him a sweet deal, prompting him to emigrate to the States right away. Moreover, he was also one of the aces in what many believed to be the best guild in the world, the Scavenger Guild. Hints of pure astonishment flashed past within the eyes of the hunters watching the footage on screen. For Jin-Woo, though, that video clip didn't come across as all that surprising. This Suspect S was an existence the rulers had created for some unknown purpose, and they possessed unimaginable powers, enough to generate dungeons, didn't they? So, obviously, it's not weird to see Huang Dongsu getting defeated by that creature. Though, besides that, Jin Wu was more concerned with what that Suspect S was trying to do. It was engaging Huang Dongsu in a conversation. It's trying to talk to him. Jin Wu's brows shot up. He concentrated hard, like when he would do during battles, and time slowed down instantly. His sharpened senses began reading the lip movements of the Suspect S. This isn't for my son, but for your sake. Even after death, you'll not be able to close your eyes. Jin Wu's heart pulsed powerfully just then. Those last words, even in death, not being able to close his eyes. If his lip reading proved to be correct, then that meant that Suspect S knew about his existence. Thankfully, he knew of a way to easily confirm the contents of that little chat those two had shared. Jin Wu suppressed his wildly pounding heart and called out the name of the brand new addition to his shadow army. Greed. Greed already knew what Jin Wu wanted to know through their shared mental link, so he immediately made his reply. All the thoughts in Jin Wu's head were getting more and more complicated and confused. The lengthy explanation of the director was coming to an end. We're planning to ask you, the guilds of the world, to help us track down and apprehend this Suspect S if you discover this man's whereabouts. Please, give us a call immediately. That is all. The end of the director's words signaled the incoming flood of questions that the hunters had been holding back until then. They impatiently raised their hands into the air. Yes, the sir over there. The director pointed to one of the raised hands, prompting that hunter to throw his question out, as if he couldn't wait anymore. Do you have any proof that this Suspect S isn't a human? We have perfectly matched his magic energy emission to that of monsters. Next question. That creature insisted that he was someone who went missing inside a dungeon. However, did a hunter like that really exist? Yes, that hunter did really exist. Next, if that's the case, why haven't you revealed the identity of that hunter? Oh, the director hesitated greatly, but eventually replied while doing his very best to avoid looking in Jin Wu's general direction. We've decided not to reveal that information because the suspect is related to one of the hunters currently attending this conference. That brought about a prompt and sudden end to the barrage of questions. The maybe changed into as expected in that instant. The director scanned the suddenly silent conference venue and decided he'd wrap up things here. Are there any other questions? It was then, someone sitting at the end of the audience seats at the back raised his hand. Even before the director could call out his name, this guy opened his mouth first. Even then, don't you think it'll be better to release the identity of that person if you really want to arrest them? Hunters didn't have to turn around to see who asked that question in that weighty voice. It was spoken in Chinese, and it came from a certain middle-aged man. One of the special authority rank hunters was looking straight at the director with a somber expression on his face. Dozens upon dozens of China's top hunters, including his own guild members, sat to his right, left, and front. The director seemed to be at a loss, but Liu Zhaijun continued to press on. Although it had been urgently decided earlier in the day to seal the information on the identity of Suspect S, the director realized that he didn't have much of a choice now and begrudgingly brought up it on the screen behind him. Beep. One press of the remote button and the information on Xiangil Huan filled up the giant screen. Soon, surprised gasps came out from several of the audience members. To think, the very first human-shaped monster to appear in dungeons possessed the exact same countenance as Hunter Xiang Jin Wu's missing father. How could there be such a coincidence? The once quiet interior of the conference venue was buzzing with the hushed voices of the hunters. Liu Zhaijun quietly stared at the screen before raising his hand again. The director had to point to the Chinese hunter once more. Hunter Liu, this time, I have a question I want to ask Xiang Jin Wu Hunter Nim. What will you do if this Suspect S really turned out to be your long-lost father, and the hunters of the world were trying to hunt him down? Jin Wu pondered that for a little bit before making his reply. If that creature is nothing but a monster, then I'll kill it with my own hands. However, if it's not a monster, but really is my father, then if it was really his father, the gathered hunters became intensely curious as to what he might say next and began swallowing their saliva. Disregarding them all, Jin Wu firmly declared his intentions for all to hear. I shall protect my family, even if that means every single hunter in the world becomes my enemy. What you said in there, were you being serious? Adam White, waiting outside the conference hall, threw that question out. Yup. Although this was no time to laugh, Adam White ended up chuckling after seeing Jin Wu's grin. Anyway, just who were the folks inside the conference hall? They were 500 or so of the top-ranked hunters from around 120 countries, who were invited by the Hunter Bureau to attend this conference. In other words, they were the top elites humanity had to offer. But then, this man went and said to them, even if it means every hunter in the world becomes my enemy, any all-tough guy wouldn't even dare to imitate what Jin Woo had done. Most likely, there should be only 2 people in this whole wide world, including you, who could say something like that in there. Hunter Nim. Jin Woo became slightly curious about who the other guy might be. Who is this other person? Well, he's in the hospital right now. Jin Woo saw Adam White's wry smile and immediately realized who that mystery other guy could be. It could only be Thomas Andre. For sure, that guy would do something just as crazy, what with that arrogant personality of his. But it's unknown whether he'll still behave that way or not. Hunters that had been gathered in small groups of 2 and 3 to chat among themselves suddenly parted ways and stood to either side of the hallway. Naturally, both Jin Woo's and Adam White's attention shifted over there as well. And that's where they spotted Liu Zhaijing. China's 7-star rank hunter was flanked by the Liu Zhaijing squadron, made up entirely of his direct subordinates, as he made his way towards Jin Woo. As if he already had a destination in mind a long time ago, the Chinese hunter walked in a straight line until he was standing right before Jin Woo's nose. What are those 2 up to now? Hunters all stopped talking right there and then. The taut tension flowing between Jin Woo and Liu Zhaijing managed to utterly silence the surroundings. The palpable feeling of unease rapidly filled this place up. What on earth is he saying? I can't understand a single word. He had never even gone anywhere remotely close to China before, so there was no way he'd know a lick of Chinese. Since the other guy was speaking in a serious expression, he too decided to form a similarly serious one. But as it turned out, listening to words he couldn't understand proved to be a rather uncomfortable and arduous task. Just as he began thinking that the Chinese hunter probably wasn't making fun of him with such a grave expression on his face, Adam White whispered something in his ear. He's saying that he hunted down the giant monster you missed during your trip to Japan on the Chinese coast recently, Xiong Hunter Nim. A look of surprise spread all over Jin Woo's face. You even know Chinese? Well, I was in charge of the Asia branch, after all. I can speak a few Asian languages. Also, I can speak a little bit of Russian, Spanish, Arabic, as well as German. Jin Woo very briefly thought that it had become a whole lot more convenient for him if Agent Adam White became one of his shadow soldiers. Of course, he quickly admonished himself for even entertaining such a thought. Maybe he still had lots more things to say. Liu Zhaijing continued on with his words in the meantime. Please, keep translating for me. All right. Adam White nodded his head and, with a determined expression, began his temporary role as an interpreter. He says that he got surprised from how unexpectedly strong the giant monster was. And he also says that it was a difficult battle as he had to fight the monster on the ocean's surface. Jin Woo remembered being surprised himself by the strength of those giant monsters, back when he was hunting them down. They had such huge bodies, yet they also moved around nimbly like wild beasts, too. Since Liu Zhaijing said he fought the monster over the water, which imposed a greater restriction on one's movements, his surprise should have been greater when compared to fighting the creature on dry land. As a fellow hunter, Jin Woo could pretty much understand where the Chinese man's fluster stemmed from. The longer Liu Zhaijing's words got, the brighter Adam White's expression became. Ever since that encounter, he says, he's been meaning to meet you. He has been really curious to learn more about the person capable of easily hunting down all those powerful monsters. That's what he said. In the same breath that Adam White finished translating, Liu Zhaijing formed a bright smile and reached his hand out for a shake. It seemed that the previous serious expression came from his nervousness. Jin Woo looked at that offered hand for a bit, before shaking it with a smile of his own. He had absolutely no reason to refuse a greeting offered up first by one of the best hunters in the world. Adam White had figured out what was going on here and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. As they shook hands, Liu Zhaijing said some other things with a smile. Jin Woo looked at Adam White again. Sounds like he's making a joke, so what is he saying? Adam White briefly formed a lost expression, before the corners of his lips arched up. He says that he's really happy about you teaching Thomas Andre Hunter Nim a lesson. He doesn't even have to take a look to know that it was Thomas who instigated the whole thing first. Jin Woo grinned at that one. But then, Liu Zhaijing's complexion darkened somewhat. Likewise, the smile on Adam White's face was wiped off as well. He quickly translated what the Chinese hunter was saying. That is why he will now pray even harder that Suspect S isn't actually your family member. He says that he doesn't want to fight against you, no matter what. Jin Woo wordlessly nodded his head. The director opened the door to the room and Jin Woo got to meet the gaze of a certain African-American woman waiting patiently for him there. It's been a while, Xiong Jin Woo Hunter Nim. Likewise, Madame Selner. It was none other than the upgrader, Norma Selner, the awakened, possessing a unique ability. He wondered if she had calmed down now that a bit of time had passed since their last encounter, but unfortunately, the light shining in her eyes was the same as before. Just what could make her move in spite of her fears? Jin Woo's curiosity had definitely been stoked now. I didn't expect you to seek me out first, ma'am, so. Jin Woo settled down on the seat opposite hers. Adam White, once more assigned as an interpreter, stuck close to Jin Woo's side. I've been having the exact same dream every day. In my dream, I watched the scenes of top hunters being hunted down by a group of unknown people. A group of unknown people hunting down powerful hunters, she said. Almost immediately, Jin Woo realized that this matter had to be related to him in some capacity. And a few days later, that dream becomes reality. Could you be talking about Christopher Reed? Madame Selner nodded her head. The director took over the explanation from there on. We had warned Mr. Reed ahead of time, but he wasn't interested in hearing us out. The end result was, well, you know what happened already. Indeed, Jin Woo had seen and heard enough of Christopher Reed's fate. Madame Selner continued on with a trembling voice. Powerful hunters supporting this world will continue to die. Those hunting the hunters will not stop what they are doing. So, what you're saying is, Jin Woo collected his thoughts and cautiously opened his mouth. You also wish to warn me of the dangers. No, that's not it. She resolutely shook her head. If she didn't want to warn him, what did she want then? Jin Woo looked at her with a puzzled expression. Madame Selner then spoke with desperately pleading tone of voice. Please, I beg of you, protect these hunters. While the dream kept repeating itself, I tried my best to memorize the faces of those hunting down the hunters. However, it was all for naught. She explained that all she could remember after waking up were faces covered in veils of darkness. And so, I decided to use another method. Even if it was just a dream, I'd use my ability to look into their true nature, their true form. Was that why you looked into my eyes last time? Yes, correct. Madame Selner readily admitted to how her ability worked. What I found within those people was limitless power. But, when I locked gazes with that thing, I had no choice but to wake up from my dream. Jin Woo's gaze momentarily drifted lower and saw her fingertips tremble imperceptibly. When my eyes looked into it, I can still clearly remember the words and voice of that thing even now. Jin Woo slightly raised his head back up again. Both the director listening in, as well as Adam White translating from the side, carried deeply tense expressions. Jin Woo asked her in a calm voice, "What did that thing say to you?" "It said that I should quietly go back and wait for the war." Madame Selner began shuddering in horror after finally recalling that memory. The voice she heard in her dream was far more vivid than any other sound she heard in reality. Unlike the frightened woman, though, Jin Woo was focused on the word war instead. That was his clue. It's similar to what the King of Giants told me, isn't it? The battle between the rulers and the sovereigns, didn't the King of Giants say it? That they were gearing up for war. Most likely, the rulers weren't the only ones preparing for this upcoming battle. If that was the case, then, just which side did the Beastards hunting the hunters belong to? Although he felt curious about this, he still hadn't heard a reply to his original question. So, he asked again. How does that relate to you asking me to protect other hunters? Because I saw the same power sleeping within you. Her cautiously mouthed words slapped wide-awake Jin Woo, and in the face. The power of the Shadow Sovereign. That's what she saw on that day, hiding deep inside of him. Since she saw the same type of power from the assassins in her dreams, their identity had to be sovereigns. Jin Woo's expression hardened. They are existences above the hunters, and in order to stop them, we need you who possess the power that equals theirs. Hunter Nim. The director quietly listened up to hear and finally entered the conversation. In all honesty, I wasn't convinced by the claim that no one can protect the hunters besides you, Seong Jin Woo Hunter Nim. But, well, the reason why this meeting had been hastily arranged was, my fight with Thomas Andre yesterday changed the way the Hunter Bureau thinks, am I correct? The director replied awkwardly after the truth was accurately pointed out. Anything he wanted, it'd be made available. And that included the greatest treasure Kamish had left behind, its rune stone. The new proposal coming from the Hunter Bureau wasn't about scouting him. Rather than annoy Jin Woo by pushing forward the already rejected offer, they'd rather borrow his power to protect America's greatest combat force. Jin Woo shut his mouth and fell into a bit of a dilemma. Madame Selner came clean on what she saw in order to help him make up his mind. There are hunters enjoying powerful blessings in this world. They have supported this world with their powers. If they are gone, this world will not be able to hold on for much longer. Jin Woo finally replied to them after his lengthy deliberation. I'm sorry. His firm refusal that didn't leave any room for reconsideration caused the director's brows to shoot up high. Is it because of some unresolved emotion towards Thomas Andre Hunter Nim? Jin Woo quickly shook his head before people jumped to wrong conclusions. No, not at all. There was only one reason why he made this decision. It's only because I don't know anything about the enemies I'll be facing. Even if he had a rough idea about what their identities were, he hadn't encountered them once yet. It was only obvious that he'd not make any promises on protecting someone else when he had no clue on the enemy's capabilities. Jin Woo wasn't some amateur who'd readily make promises when he wasn't sure whether he could keep them in the first place. I'll observe the situation for the time being, and then he'd take care of those things he could handle first. Can you get me the list of the hunters you people wanted me to protect? Have you changed your mind? No, but I'm curious about something else. Oh, Adam White struggled to hide his disappointment. He got his hopes raised up before being shot down. Still, he didn't think this was all bad news, because it indicated that Hunter Seong Jin Woo was still interested in this problem one way or the other. And also, can you organize an opportunity where I can meet the ones found on that list? There is a big party organized by the Bureau. All the hunters attending the conference are invited. If you wish to meet them, you can most likely do that there. Hunter Nim. The moment he stepped into the banquet hall, everyone's attention was laser focused on him in an instant. Look, isn't that? Yes, I saw. He's right in front of us, but I can't even feel his presence. He's on a completely different level, and with all the attention being poured on him, it was only natural that even Yu Jin-ho would be subjected to their intense scrutiny as well. In that case, the hunter next to him must be. He fought Thomas Andre in order to rescue that young fella. The situation had settled down somewhat by now after the Hunter Bureau had released the public statement. On one hand, every hunter in here was deeply shocked by the fact that Jin Woo was willing to clash against the entirety of the Scavenger Guild for the sake of his rank D hunter comrade. But on the flip side, they were also getting a heavy case of goosebumps, knowing that the declaration he made towards the end of the conference's first day was not a bluff at all. In any case, now that the Bureau had cleared up the air, lots of hunters were beginning to seek out a chance to engage Jin Woo in a conversation. This was the result of his public image going through a revamp of sorts, going from a monster capable of pummeling the freakishly strong Goliath, to that of a monster who'd not hesitate at anything to protect his comrades. The thing was, though, the very first person to pluck up his courage and made his approach was not a hunter, but a chairman of a very famous global corporation specializing in dealing with monster remains. It's my honor to meet you like this, Seong Jin Woo Hunter Nim. The businessman introduced himself first, and then, we'd like to purchase the remains of all the giant-type monsters you have hunted down in Japan. Do you have some time to discuss this matter in greater detail? This is a good opportunity. Jin Woo grinned affably and introduced Yu Jin-ho next to him to the businessman. I'm in charge of the raid aspect of the guild. I usually leave all the business-related discussions to my trusted vice master over here. I'm Yu Jin-ho, vice chairman of the Jin Guild. Ah, yes. Hello. It's a pleasure. I don't usually discuss business-related matters in occasions such as this one. But if it's you, Mr. Chairman. Jin Woo watched on as Yu Jin-ho expertly guided the businessman to somewhere better suited for a conversation like the one they were about to have, and formed a satisfied smile. This kid, he's finally acting like a proper vice chair now. But Jin Woo's eyes sharpened almost instantly afterwards. Now that the pair of potential obstructions went away, the real thing would begin now. Adam White got close to Jin Woo. Here is the list you asked for. The screen of the tablet PC he handed over displayed the 10 names of the hunters who could all legitimately be called the world's best in numerical order. We at the Bureau had taken all the feats each hunter had achieved and converted them into points so we can assign them numbered rankings. These 10 people are the ones with the highest amount of hunter points in the world. The hunter points, he said. Jin Woo was intrigued by the fact that the feats and achievements of a hunter were represented through a points system. He then realized that his name wasn't on the list and asked Adam White, "Where am I on this list? If we were to include your feat in hunting down the giant-type monsters in the points tally, then you should be around here." The American agent pointed in the spot between 3rd and 4th. The names of Liu Zhaijing, Thomas Andre, and Christopher Reed occupied the spots above. The mere fact that he was already located beneath those three when he hadn't been a rank S hunter for long attested to all the incredible feats he managed to achieve so far. The 4th place is India's Siddharth Bakshan, and the 5th spot is. The first 5 spots naturally belong to the 5 surviving Special Authority rank hunters. As for the spots below, they were also occupied by some of the most decorated, celebrated hunters in the world. It was then Jin Woo stopped reading the list and raised his head after he heard a bit of commotion rising up. An unexpected appearance of a certain guest had thrown the party-goers into confusion and chaos. Confirming who this guest was, Jin Woo handed the tablet back to Adam White. Hunter Nim. You don't need to worry. As he expected, this guest displayed not one hint of hesitation as he strode straight towards Jin Woo. He even proceeded to step aside Liu Zhaijing, trying to dissuade him in the middle of the way, and stopped right in front of the Korean hunter. Jin Woo mouthed the man's name, Thomas Andre. Jin Woo didn't lose his relaxed demeanor even when Thomas Andre was standing before him. However, the same couldn't be said about pretty much all of the onlookers staring at him, and the American with his arm wrapped in bandages. They were getting properly freaked out now. The burly American looked at his Korean counterpart, who was at least a good head shorter than he was. Hunter Seong Jin Woo, I want to ask you a question. My arm. Thomas Andre raised his left arm, currently wrapped tightly in bandages. I heard that the damage from the magic energy attack left behind on this arm was so great that healers were unable to fix it. Doctors told me the same thing. They said that, although it's healing bit by bit, it'll take a long time before I can use my arm properly again. He used his left arm to block Jin Woo's fist, lugging around a considerable amount of magic energy. Right after the fight ended, the bones in the arm disintegrated into a fine powder, and there was a chance that he'd never get to use his left arm ever again. Traces of bitter battle left behind all over his body gifted him with all sorts of aches and dull pains. However, the pain also gave him the clarity of mind to think about what happened, and then think some more. But he failed to arrive at an answer, and having no choice, he decided to seek Jin Woo out like this. If it was you, you'd have no problem finishing me off, or any of my guild members, the ones who kidnapped the Korean's comrade in this foreign land, and proceeded to attack him when he came to rescue the captive, were Thomas Andre and his underlings. Just as the statement released by the Hunter Bureau had alluded to, even if Jin Woo decided to kill every single scavenger guild member, he would have escaped any punishment from the US government. Of course, they wouldn't have any means to prosecute him in the first place. However, Seong Jin Woo took the lives of no one, save for Hwang Dong-soo. Thomas Andre was really dying to know the why of it all. Too bad for him. Jin Woo's answer was so simple that it instantly rendered his deep pondering of the past few days utterly pointless. Because none of you committed a crime worthy of death. Jin Woo found it hard to overlook Thomas Andre's arrogant attitude. But still, the American only showed up back then to protect one of his own guild members, Hwang Dong-soo. It was the same story for the rest of the Scavenger Guild members, too. Thomas Andre's thoughts were even more complicated than before he heard the answer, but on the flip side, he felt much more refreshed and could form a relaxed smile now. I'd like to treat you to a good meal after my arm heals up. Can you leave your contact detail with my manager lady over here so I can call you later? Thomas Andre sounded cautious as he bade goodbye and turned around to leave. Laura was on standby behind him until then and lightly bowed her head. Her boss didn't even take a second look behind him and exited from the banquet hall. Every time he took a step forward, the partygoers parted to the side as if he was Moses and they were the Red Sea. Laura watched his distancing back before shifting her gaze over to Jin Woo. My guild master was expressing his gratitude towards you not killing any of his guild members just now, Hunter Nim. He might look that way, but in reality, he is far sheer than you think. Oh, I see. Well, if she said so, that must be it, then. Thanks to the other side showing up like this first, Jin Woo got to save time on searching for Thomas Andre and sticking one of his soldiers in the guy's shadow. So, he just nodded his head to say everything was cool. Laura, now that her job of interpreting her boss's particular way of saying goodbyes was complete, pulled out her memo pad and got ready to jot the information down. Hunter Nim, if it's not too much trouble, may I ask you for your contact details? And also, the blonde beauty with her hair tucked up neatly into a bun formed an arresting smile. Guildmaster wishes to express his gratitude with a gift of some kind. If there is anything you need or want, please tell me. Oh, thank you, but I don't need any. Jin Woo politely declined the offer. Laura quickly formed an awkward smile as if she was troubled by that reply and asked him to reconsider his decision. My guild master is, well, his desire to emerge on top is quite strong, so if he thinks he's owing someone, he will probably go crazy before long. It really doesn't matter at all what the item is, so please tell me what you'd like to have. Jin Woo was about to decline again but stopped resisting after listening to Laura's recommendation. He figured that, although he didn't really need anything, it was against etiquette to reject the other side's show of goodwill again when they were willing to go this far. If it's a useful short sword or a dagger. He had run into quite a few opponents with incredible defenses recently, and the pair of Demon King's short swords was proving to be ineffective against them. He thought that it might not be a bad idea to swap his weapons for something else with the aid of the Scavenger Guild. Even if no useful item came out from this deal, he'd have nothing to lose anyway. Short swords or daggers. I see. Thank you, Hunter Nim. Laura smiled brightly after hearing his reply. She finished jotting down on her memo pad and also left the banquet hall. By the way, there's one person missing, isn't there? I don't see the sixth person on the list in here. But, how did you? Jinwoo shrugged his shoulders, and Adam White nodded his head as if he understood. All right. Trade secret, was it? The American agent continued on. We lost all contact with that person a few days prior to the conference, unfortunately. The Brazilian government is searching for that person's whereabouts in secret, but they haven't found any concrete leads yet. Jinwoo nodded his head. He got to attach a shadow on the number 2 of the list, Thomas Andre, just now. The third place Christopher Reed and the sixth Brazilian hunter were not around, which means there are 7 people left. There was a well-known saying in Korea. If you wanted to know where the president's office was located in the Korean Hunters Association building, just look for the very last window with the lights switching off. Even today, Go Gun Huey was staying behind in his office till late hours to finish up the remainder of his work. The cases of accidents and incidents were happening more frequently lately as the monsters got stronger and the number of newbie awakened increased. Go Gun Huey put the document down on his desk and rubbed his tired eyes. This is strange. For some reason, his heart didn't want to stop trembling for the last few days. His problematic heart had been plaguing him for the last couple of years, so he wasn't too bothered by this, but still, his condition didn't feel right even compared to the past. Is this the limit? His personal physician warned him that, if he didn't stop working right away, he'd die within the next half year or so. But time continued to tick on for another year. Then, the second year came and went, too, and he still found himself in this office after all this time. If this is as far as I can go, then there's nothing much I can do about it. It's already something else that I managed to carry on this far. Go Gun Huey formed a thin smile. His phone suddenly went off unexpectedly. Who's calling me at this late hour? Hopefully, there hadn't been yet another big-scale incident taking place somewhere. Feeling quite anxious, Go Gun Huey quickly picked up his phone. Dear, nothing bad happened today. Yes, the call was actually from his wife. Oh, hi, dear. The wife was calling to find out her husband's status since he hadn't come back home yet, even though it was already so late into the night. Her voice managed to gradually soften the stiff face of Go Gun Huey. What do you mean, something bad? I was on my home anyway. It was then. The phone suddenly lost its signal. Go Gun Huey tilted his head and put the phone down, before shifting his attention to the outside of the window unconsciously. He forgot to breathe, then. Everything that should be visible through the window was all gone. Various buildings, the roads, even people, all of them. The only thing remaining was the pitch-black darkness that defied all attempt to decipher how deep it was. Only a blink of an eye later, the scenery outside his window had changed to something else entirely. The association president Go Gun Huey gasped out in pure shock and was about to get up from his chair. But then, he realized that there was someone else in the office right this moment. Someone he had never even seen before. That man was sitting on the couch as if he had been there for a very long time, too. A human. No, this isn't the aura of a human being. It wasn't just the aura, either. A face as pale as a corpse long, silvery white hair, pointy ears, and silver eyes gleaming brightly like a pair of gemstones. It was an ice elf, also known as the White Phantom. Somehow, Go Gun Huey had failed to sense its approach, as well as its entrance into the office. He slowly placed the phone's receiver back into its cradle and quietly threw out a question. Who are you? Would talking to it work? The association president Go Gun Huey quietly observed the uninvited guest. However, the creature didn't say anything. Different from other monsters, though, it didn't immediately bare its fangs. No, it just sat there in silence while ignoring the owner of this office altogether. As this uncomfortable silence persisted for a brief period, Go Gun Huey found himself with an opportunity to study his new opponent in detail. It looks exactly like an ice elf. This is not an opponent that I can deal with. Go Gun Huey quickly assessed his situation, and then very softly flipped his smartphone up to glance at the screen in order to signal for help. When he did that, the monster shifted its gaze over to him. Go Gun Huey confirmed that the smartphone had no signal, just as the creature had said, and put the device down. Am I dreaming a bad dream right now? Not only did a monster intrude into the HQ of Korea's Hunters Association right in the middle of Seoul, it even began speaking in Korean, too. It was then. Go Gun Huey felt a sharp pain brush past his left shoulder and quickly grabbed it tight. Something happened the moment this monster pointed at him. He cautiously lifted his hand away to discover a cut wound on the shoulder, as if something sharp had sliced him up. The truly mystifying thing was, even though his flesh had been sliced open, not a drop of blood came from the wound. The monster was still sitting relaxedly on the same spot in the couch. Go-Gun Huey nodded his head. I see. So, this is reality. In that case, let me ask you again. Just what are you? The monster slowly stood up from the couch. At the same time, couches, the coffee table, and other furniture nearby the creature were shoved violently away and crashed into the walls. The furniture froze up in an instant and got stuck on the walls. Oh my god. Go-Gun Huey's eyes opened wider. The goosebumps-inducing chill slowly permeated into the office of the association president. Just who would dare to label Go-Gun Huey as a weakling in this world? However, he realized that he couldn't dispute that claim. The creature before his eyes possessed this Mount Tai-like authoritative power, and whenever it opened its mouth, its voice reverberated and exploded like a thunderclap. This thing was on another realm compared to him. He possessed incomparably excellent senses, so he could instantly figure out the differences between his and his opponent's power level. A powerful explosion swept away the spot where Go-Gun Huey had been standing on. White smoke created from the extreme coldness rose up like a veil of fog and covered the surroundings until it was impossible to see anything. But then, a pair of flames emitting pure light began burning brightly within this smoke. Those were a pair of eyes glowing in a golden hue. The monster confirmed the color of the light oozing out from the screen of whiteness and formed an eerie smile, before throwing the remaining clump of cold air in its other hand. Go-Gun Huey swung his arm and swiped that cold air away. It was flung away and crashed heavily against the wall. The cold air exploded and the entirety of the wall was blown away. Through the gaping opening, one could see a space filled with endless pitch-black darkness. The white smoke obscuring the view slowly dissipated, and the unheard association president Go-Gun Huey was revealed in full. Not just his two eyes, but his whole body was enveloped in this stupendous golden aura that wavered around gently in the air. You separated the president's office and hid it in between dimensions. Quite impressive. A completely different voice than how he normally sounded came out from Go-Gun Huey's mouth. The monster began speaking again. Unlike the tone of voice that sounded emotional, the monster's expression remained unchanging. With a frozen stiff face, it continued to speak. This time, it was Go-Gun Huey's expression's turn to harden. Not only him, but the locations of all the rulers had been exposed, and 2 had already lost their vessels, as well. Such a counterattack was out of the ruler's expectations. The monster formed a creepy smile. Do your worst, Sovereign of Frost. Go-Gun Huey roared out thunderously. The wavering golden aura surrounding his body intensified by a step, before transforming into a figure emitting this bright light from his entire body. The darkness filling up the space beyond was illuminated brightly in an instant. However, even though it was being subjected to this incredible power, the Sovereign of Frost didn't bother to wipe that ridiculing smile off its lips. Ice-cold white light oozed out from the Sovereign's eyes. At the same time, the floor beneath its feet began freezing up. Just like how the bright golden light was enveloping Go-Gun Huey, the intense and bitterly cold air surrounded the Sovereign's entire figure. And then, the creature bared its fangs. At this moment, when the Sovereign had let down its guard, Go-Gun Huey instinctively realized that this could be his only chance and dashed forward like an arrow to pounce on the Sovereign. Unfortunately, the opponent's reaction was definitely not slow, either. The golden light and the cold air got into a messy tangle and caused a series of intense explosions. But, as the battle became protracted, Go-Gun Huey's movements visibly dulled. Compared to his enemy, the injuries on his body continued to accumulate. As his actions got harsher and heavier, more and more white steam leaked out from his panting mouth. The length of time a patient at death's doorstep could fight while stuck in such coldness was at best 2 minutes tops. Just as the Sovereign had alluded to, the result of this fight was already set in stone. His stamina had already reached its limit. Go-Gun Huey had already expended more than the permitted amount of magical energy his body could handle. His eyes became bloodshot, and blood began leaking out from the corner of his lips. Too bad, all of his efforts were for naught. A sharp ice spike stabbed directly into his chest and emerged out his back. Go-Gun Huey spat out a mouthful of blood. The Sovereign of Frost inflicted a mortal wound on its opponent with an ice spike shooting out from the tip of its hand. Go-Gun Huey panted heavily as he intensely glared at his enemy. You think I fought you without a plan? His left hand powerfully and tightly grasped the Sovereign's wrist just beneath his chest. Just like how we didn't expect you to imitate our ways, a huge variable has occurred that exceeds your expectation. The eyes of the Sovereign grew wider as it studied the expression of confidence on Go-Gun Huey's face. A bluff? No, it couldn't be. His expression was too loaded with hidden meanings for that. Just as the sovereign's thoughts arrived at that point, the creature had to hurriedly tilt its head to the side. Truly by a paper-thin margin, an incredible amount of magical energy shot past the location where its head was only a millisecond ago. The attack was so powerful that it even burnt away Go-Gun Huey's right arm after firing it. The magic energy crashed into the opposite wall of the separated space and caused a ginormous explosion. The entirety of the separated space trembled from the sheer power. If such an attack found its intended target, just what might have happened? That was dangerous. Too bad for the human. The sovereign had sensed the enemy's intention in that instant, and as a result, was able to dodge it at the very last possible moment. The sovereign stared at Go-Gun Huey, who must have exhausted all of his remaining energy from that attack, and formed a smile. That smile was clearly one of ridicule. However, Go-Gun Huey was smiling along as well. That's right. The sovereign discovered that smile floating up on the pale, waning face of the human and began feeling this puzzling sense of encroaching ill omen. How come it was being overwhelmed by this creeping chill, even though victory was at hand? Its puzzlement didn't last for long, though. Crack. The sovereign's gaze quickly shifted to its rear. The barrier separating this space from the outside was crumbling into pieces after that enormous magical energy slammed into it. Was this his original intention? Even then, didn't this act ultimately a meaningless resistance? It was then. The consciousness of the ruler dwelling within the old man's body raised the corner of his lips. Will it really be that way? Soon, the barrier shattered completely and the space regained its original appearance. Lights from the other buildings, cars on the streets below those buildings, and the president's office, too. Everything returned to their original place, which meant Go-Gun Huey summoned up the last of his strength and shouted at the ground beneath him. Now, from beneath his feet, a blob separated from his shadow and rapidly transformed into that of a certain ant. This creature avoided the sovereign altogether and, while screeching out loudly, jumped outside the window. Take. The sovereign quickly shifted its gaze over to that creature. It couldn't understand why a denizen of the chaos world suddenly appeared here. However, it was just that, a lone denizen. It was just a weakling of a soldier that submitted to the king of insects. That was all. Even then, the sovereign couldn't rip its eyes away from that ant getting further and further away. Could it be? Eventually, the sovereign's brows shot up higher. It should have realized the truth from the beginning. It should have realized that the reason why the fragment of the brilliant light poured out enough power to shatter the barrier even at the heavy cost to the human's body, when the ruler always chose to conserve its strength, worried that the vessel would break sooner if it went all out. Indeed, the beastard hadn't been resisting so bitterly in order to escape from the barrier. There was yet another reason behind his actions. No, the Sovereign of Frost belatedly realized the identity of that ant, and its eyes grew even wider than before. The Sovereign hurriedly discarded Go-Gun Huey and leapt in the direction where that ant had run off to. Cold air coalesced in its hand and froze up to create an ice sickle. The creature instantly arrived at the ant's location and slammed down with its ice sickle. But then, the wrist wielding the sickle was immediately grabbed by someone's hand. The grasping power was so great that the Sovereign couldn't retract its arm at all, no matter what. But, even before the creature had any time to be surprised by that power, its neck was grabbed hard, too. The Sovereign of Frost confirmed just who appeared in the spot where the ant had disappeared from and felt its heart tumble to the pit of its stomach. And then, it asked in a disbelieving tone of voice. Meanwhile, Jinwoo grasped the neck of this Sovereign of Frost tightly so it wouldn't be able to escape, and shot at a puzzled look. An ice elf. Jinwoo had a bit of history with the monsters called ice elves. Didn't he encounter these creatures when he stumbled into a red gate for the first time in his life? How rueful did he feel back then, after seeing the boss mob Baruka slipping out of his hands while leaving only a dagger behind. Just remembering that event brought back all the bad emotions he felt then after failing to extract that monster's shadow. And here I was, having just barely forgotten about it. While gripping the monster tightly, he asked this mysterious ice elf a question. The monster gritted its teeth and shook off Jinwoo's hands. What an incredible physical strength. Even before he had the chance to get surprised from the monster slipping out of his grasp, Jinwoo picked up on this chilling aura coagulating around the creature's mouth. Inexplicably, the image of Demon King Baron shooting lightning out of its mouth overlapped with this beastard. By sheer instinct, Jinwoo tilted his torso away. The bitterly cold air shot out from the monster's mouth, sped past Jinwoo's original position, and poured out into the air behind him. After confirming the scary amount of magical energy being poured out by the monster with his two eyes, Jinwoo quickly retreated an adequate enough distance away. He lightly dusted the particles of ice clinging onto his shoulder and stared intently at the ice elf. No, the Sovereign of Frost. What was this fool talking about? Jin Woo was getting rather curious about the meaning behind this monster's constant babbling. But too bad, he didn't have enough leeway to hold a cordial cue in a session with this creature. Jin Woo took a glance at the hurting shoulder and quietly summoned the Demon King's short swords from his inventory. Weapons silently appeared in his hands. Is it a mage-type creature? Judging from how it barely managed to get out of his grasp, its physical strength or defenses didn't seem to be as high as its magical energy reserve suggested. Which was a relief, actually. He knew from his vast experiences in fighting many different types of monsters up until now that the mage-type enemies were the easiest to deal with since they could be killed in an instant. Jin Woo frowned deeply. He had no desire to let this guy leave, so just who decided when they would stop fighting? Meanwhile, the Sovereign pointed towards the broken wall of the Hunters Association building. Technically speaking, he came here because the ant soldier he left behind in the association president's shadow sent him an urgent alert. That was all. Jin Woo's gaze shifted towards the location the Sovereign's outstretched finger was pointing at, and he found Go Gun Huey lying on the floor there. The unconscious association president was covered in blood from head to toe, and even at a casual glance, he could tell that the man's life was hanging precariously on the edge. A large, incredibly sharp ice lance suddenly formed on the left hand of the Sovereign. The moment the creature's words came to an end, the lance flew towards Go Gun Huey. Jin Woo's eyes widened. He pushed his concentration to the absolute max, causing the flow of time to slow down greatly. He watched the lance fly agonizingly slowly, but accurately, towards the unmoving association president. Ruler's authority. He tried to use his invisible hand to stop the ice lance, but the magical energy of the one who threw it easily thwarted his attempts. Enraged, Jin Woo shifted his glare at the Sovereign of Frost. The Beastard was waiting for Jin Woo's answer. That was. He bit his lower lip before dashing towards the spot where the association president Go Gun Huey had collapsed on. The air where Jin Woo used to be wavered and tumbled about from the explosive power. Just before the lance landed, he arrived by Go Gun Huey's side first with almost no time to spare and dragged the unmoving man away from the weapon's trajectory. Further enraged by this cheap tactic, Jin Woo raised his head to look, but the Beastard was already jumping into a small gate to escape from this battle. In a rush, he quickly summoned Baruka's dagger from the inventory and threw it. Dagger rush. The dagger flew in a dead straight line and accurately stabbed into the Sovereign's shoulder. The Sovereign of Frost glared at the dagger in its shoulder, then glared at the one who threw it next at Jin Woo and gnashed its teeth. It soon disappeared into the depth of the gate. Jin Woo was thinking of chasing after the creature, but seeing the gates gradually shrink in size, he gave up on that idea. Besides, Go Gun Huey's current condition wasn't good enough for him to focus his attention elsewhere. The older man gasped out a pained moan. Jin Woo's lips closed shut in a straight line as he watched the association president Go Gun Huey teeter precariously on the edge of life and death. This can't be healed with a healing potion. In that case, the best response he could come up with was to. Jin Woo yelled out at the top of his lungs. Baru. Right away, he sensed the familiar aura hurriedly fly out from his apartment from afar away. Baru smashed past several walls after flying in with all his might and entered the president's office, before kneeling down in front of Jin Woo. Have you called for me, oh my king? Jin Woo cautiously lowered Go Gun Huey's upper torso on the floor and took a step back. There was so much blood dripping out from the association president that Jin Woo's hands were now painted crimson just from supporting the older man's torso for a few seconds. Jin Woo's complexion grew gloomier as he stared at the droplets of blood fall to the floor from his fingertips. Baru did as his master willed it and approached Go Gun Huey. He began using up all of his magical energy healing the gravely injured man. Unfortunately, the complexion of the dying man didn't want to improve at all even with such a concerted healing effort. Baru panicked and opened his mouth. My king. Baru's scared eyes shifted over to Jin Woo as he spoke. My healing magic isn't working on him. I can't heal this man. What? He didn't seem to be exaggerating, because Baru's hands were shuddering as he continued on with his healing magic. Even Jin Woo could sense the enormous amount of Baru's magic energy being spent right now. At this rate, even the former Ant King would keel over from exhaustion. Jin Woo halted the healing effort and sat down next to Go Gun Huey to take a closer look at the man's current condition. Despite Baru's near-selfless efforts, the association president's vitality had weakened even further than before. Whatever that attack was, the hole in Go Gun Huey's chest didn't want to close up even after Jin Woo poured in a whole bottle of the most expensive healing potion sold in the store. Out of sheer desperation, he even summoned out the bottle of divine water of life, but before he could use it, someone grasped his wrist. Please, stop. It was Go Gun Huey. He managed somehow to force his eyes open. Association President. His breathing remained heavy as if it was on the brink of cutting out. He still got to confirm the faces of Jin Woo and Baru next to him, though. You did come for me. Thank you. A weak smile spread on Go Gun Huey's face. Please, hold on for a little bit longer. I'll take you to a hospital right now. Jin Woo's urgent voice only managed to earn a shake of Go Gun Huey's head. It's useless. The attack that got me far exceeds the level of being curable with medicine or magic. But, sir, Jin Woo was about to get angry after hearing those words of weakness from the association president. But he had to stop. Go Gun Huey's trembling hand was grasping his, that was why. Listen to me. As if he was spurring on the dying embers of life for one last hurrah, Go Gun Huey's brows rose up high, his eyes opening up wide. I was able to get in touch with the will of the great beings. I saw their plans, who our common enemies are, and the things that we must do. The blood pooling in Go Gun Huey's mouth gurgled and welled up. What a relief that you're here with us. To think you'd possess that kind of power. Thank you, God. Tears began welling up in Go Gun Huey's eyes as he stared at Jin Woo. He then grasped the young hunter's hand with both of his own and spoke with a trembling voice. Gates and dungeons weren't for them. In order to protect us, they chose this method, and cough. At that moment, Go Gun Huey coughed and reddish-black blood spluttered out from his mouth. Jin Woo hurriedly tried to use the divine water, but Go Gun Huey shook his head. He knew the condition of his own body better than anyone. Sometime in the future there will come a time when you must make a decision. When you do, I pray that you remain on the side of mankind. Hearing the pain-gasping voice of Go Gun Huey, Jin Woo felt as if his heart was being ripped to pieces. But all he could do right now was to quietly listen to his words. That's all he could do. I always wished I could fight alongside young people like you. But this body of mine made sure that would never happen. For the first time ever, Go Gun Huey poured out what was in his heart without holding back. I don't regret anything. I can now entrust the future to young people like you. That's all I ask for. Go Gun Huey's hands holding onto Jin Woo's powerlessly fell to the floor, and he was no longer staring at the young man, but at the ceiling of his office. Was it because his tears had spread out? The lights hanging on the ceiling, the ones he always thought were a bit too dim for his liking, seemed excessively blinding today. Go Gun Huey shielded his eyes to block those lights. I'm truly relieved. Thank you. At the end of those words, the association president Go Gun Huey stopped murmuring altogether, confirming that he was no longer breathing now. Jin Woo wordlessly closed the deceased man's unmoving eyes shut. Like his final words of gratitude, the expression on his face was one of peace. Jin Woo raised his head above to stare outside. He saw through the destroyed wall the raindrops falling from the cloudy sky, the sky that had been gloomy since the early morning. Next day, several headlines dominated the front pages of countless newspapers. The first news item was about Brazil's greatest hunter, Jonas, being found on the vicinity of a river as a corpse. The second one was about the grisly murder of the Korean Hunters Association president after his chest was stabbed through by an unidentified assailant. And finally, the news of hunter Seong Jin Woo returning to South Korea. First, it was Christopher Reed. Next, Brazil's top hunter, Jonas. And finally, the Korean Hunters Association president, Go Gun Huey. The news of these hunters dying, thought to be some of the world's best, was revealed to the public one after the other and caused substantial chaos in their wake. If the enemies were capable of murdering the hunters who stood at the apex when it came to fighting power, then just who would be able to catch them? People finally realized that, although hunters existed to hunt down monsters, they too could be hunted down in turn by their supposed prey, just like everyone else. This only served to create yet another layer of terror in the people's hearts. Regular folks were being protected by the hunters, but then, who was protecting these hunters? Was that monster so strong that you couldn't stop it? Hunter Nim. Jin Woo shook his head. When I got here, it was already. Jin Woo formed a gloomy expression again, and Wu Jinqiao's head dropped lower in the end. I'm sorry. I'm sure you're also feeling really bad right now. I was just frustrated and that ended up troubling you. Wu Jinqiao knew better than anyone that Jin Woo was not responsible. That was perhaps why the latter's attempt at trying to console the former only made it worse. I still can't believe it. Wu Jinqiao's gaze remained fixed on the floor as he carried on. How could he die? He was urging me the day before to return as soon as possible because he wanted to hear about everything that happened in the US. Jin Woo patiently waited for Wu Jinqiao as the latter struggled to finish his sentence. What did the association president say to you? Before he closed his eyes, he said that he felt relieved. Pardon? Wu Jinqiao raised his head, surprised. He felt relieved that the future could be entrusted to the young hunters, like myself. That's what he meant. Tears began falling from Wu Jinqiao's eyes as his emotions welled up. He felt moved by the generous heart of Association President Go Gun Huey, who worried for the future of his fellow men right up until the end. "I'll kill that beastard." Jin Woo's expression became extremely cold. "The monster that murdered the Association President. I'll definitely hunt it down, not just for the sake of avenging Go Gun Huey, but to send the clear message to those beastards threatening him." Jin Woo told him about the decision he had come to after a few days of deliberation. "Can you organize me a press conference?" Reporters descended on the press conference venue like a flock of vultures. Jin Woo was being seen as a walking, talking bundle of big news waiting to happen to these reporters for a while now. And such a man had called for a press conference, the first time ever that he did that, so which reporter worth his or her salt wouldn't be interested in that? The conference venue became quite noisy, as befitting the large number of the gathered crowd. But, just like a lie, every single one of them shut their mouths as soon as Jin Woo made his entrance. Right away, the expectant silence filled up the venue. Jin Woo could feel each of the focused gazes from the reporters landing on his skin as he began addressing them. A group of monsters possessing a high level of intelligence is currently hunting down humanity's top-ranked hunters. They are stronger than any hunters out there, and they also employ all sorts of means to get to their targets. A group of monsters. There was more than one monster that murdered the Association President Go Gun Huey. The reporters were immediately thrown into confusion. However, Jin Woo got his information straight from the mouth of the King of Giants, the Sovereign of the Beginning. These monsters employ special magic that separates the targeted space from the surroundings. That's how they isolate their targets. This was incredible information. He could reveal this without hesitation because he had met a sovereign already. That is why, if you fear that you might be their next target, please stay as close as humanly possible to your comrades that could protect you. However, just in case, he said. Jin Woo finally revealed the reason why he wanted to hold this press conference in the first place. "If you don't have a comrade that can fulfill that role, contact the Korean Hunters Association. They will put you through to me." Exclamations of admiration came out from the lips of the reporters. Such unwavering confidence. This sure was a surprising announcement capable of blowing away the fog of anxiety from the public's hearts. The thing was, though, Jin Woo was actually aiming for something else. "I'll lay a trap using all the hunters that might be targeted by those beastards." With this, he'd be able to trace the movements of the sovereigns even if they targeted the retired or inactive hunters like the Association President Go Gun Huey. He had no doubt that at least one of them would fall into his trap sooner or later. The two security guards on duty jumped up from their seats in surprise after seeing Thomas Andre walking towards their guard station, but he simply signaled at them, telling them to settle back down. Beep. He pressed his thumb on the fingerprint scanner, and the automated door slid open. He and the top manager of the guild, Laura, stepped into the underground storage facility located below the guild's building. The two guards who got spooked by Thomas Andre's presence were rank hunters in reality, since he stayed in the building's penthouse suite and would be informed immediately if something happened. The number of people who could step into this storage facility were extremely few. Thomas Andre didn't hesitate for a second and headed straight into the deepest part of the underground facility. "Are you really planning to gift him with those, sir?" They finally gained access to the chamber housing those after another round of fingerprint scanning. "What's the matter? Do you believe this is too much for the price of my guild members, as well as my life?" "No, sir, that's not it, but, well, you think he's not good enough as a hunter to wield these guys, then?" Laura knew that talking to him now was a waste of time. Since she knew retorting to him wouldn't work anyway, she decided to close her mouth shut for now. Meanwhile, Thomas Andre stood before the items he was searching for. These weapons didn't even suit him at all, yet he couldn't help but feel his heart tremble every time he stood before them. "No matter how many times I look at them, they still look cool," Thomas Andre murmured in admiration, and Laura tried to dissuade him one last time, her voice sounding slightly unwilling. "Sir, there are only 2 of these in the entire world." "Yup, that's true, and it'll stay that way. I'm sure it will. Even then, will you still give them away?" "That's why I'm giving them to him." Thomas Andre formed a smirk. It had been almost 8 years since these guys were crafted, but the searing light coming off of them hadn't diminished by a single bit. "The best hunter needs the best weapons. Don't you think it's too much of a waste to let them rot in here?" As if to answer him, a pair of short swords resting within the metal case reflected the spotlight, the glare of the blades remaining sharp and cold. Late at night, Jin Woo stood on the rooftop of the 100 stories tall Deesung Tower. Powerful gusts of wind constantly blew at him as he stood at this dizzying height, but his body didn't even sway for 1 second. His eyes were fixated on the cityscape below. He could see the streets of Seoul filled with the palpable air of grief. One of the electronic advertisement boards was playing a documentary detailing the life of the association president Go Gun-hui. Jin Woo's sharp glare scanned every corner of the city like a hawk searching for prey. Meanwhile, his shadow soldiers were searching through Seoul with greater efficiency than before, perhaps owing to the fact that they felt familiar with the order as it was similar to the one he issued in America. A great deal of information flowed into Jin Woo's mind, but none of them was what he wanted to know. No matter how much of the city was searched, no traces of that ancient white phantom could be detected. As expected, this method isn't going to work. Jin Woo knew all too well that using a method like this to catch a monster who was capable of freely entering and exiting a dimension through gates was not the answer. Back then, he tried to stick a shadow soldier on the Beastard before it made its escape so he could chase after it later. But that ended in failure, because that creature didn't have that one little thing that all existences possessed. It didn't have a shadow. It's supposed to be a spiritual body or some such, right? The King of Giants did say that both the sovereigns and the rulers were made up of the spiritual bodies so they couldn't be turned into shadow soldiers. If that was the reason why that sovereign didn't possess a shadow, then Jin Woo no longer enjoyed the benefit of having the greatest method of tracking someone down. However, it doesn't matter. The King of Giants warned him back then. Once Jin Woo's existence was known to the remaining sovereigns, they would not sit back idly and suck on their thumbs. That's what he said, meaning these sovereigns would come knocking on his doorstep sooner rather than later, not to target the association president Go Gun-hui, but him as their sole target. But when that happens, he would. The heavy and intense killing intent spread out from Jin Woo. However, Jin Woo wasn't the only one getting ready for a battle. The Sovereign of Frost, after successfully escaping to the hideout, summoned other sovereigns who had already descended on this planet. 3 men and 1 woman appeared within this frozen cave. The Sovereign of Frost addressed these 4 kings, and then it proceeded to explain what it saw and heard to its new guests. The sovereigns weren't even bothered in the slightest by the coldness of the cave capable of freezing a person's flesh and blood, but after hearing the story, their atmosphere became incredibly frosty in mere seconds. Also, wasn't that the reason why the Dragon Emperor couldn't descend to this world, too? The Sovereign of Frost resolutely shook its head. 2 of the sovereigns who had sensed the lingering power of the Shadow Sovereign back in Jeju Island could only agree with their comrade at this point. The atmosphere remained frosty as the Sovereign of Frost continued on. Too bad, the response to its request for aid was indifferent, to say the least. This made some sense. Their opponent this time was seen as one of the most powerful kings among the 9 kings that ruled over the Chaos world. A battle against him was the same as killing yourself. It was only obvious that these sovereigns would become extra hesitant by the prospect. One of the sovereigns spoke up. The Sovereign of Destruction. If it was him, then the betrayer would be dealt with quite swiftly. However, the Sovereign of Frost growled angrily at its comrades. The dagger that stabbed into its shoulder, the wound inflicted from that encounter was no ordinary physical injury, but one that directly bruised its ego. The Sovereign of Frost had a score to settle with the Shadow Sovereign. Even though its resolution was unwavering, one of the sovereigns still stepped away. Another sovereign brought up the incident of the King of the Demons, Baron, who unwisely went up against the Shadow Sovereign and disappeared from the spot, as well. The Sovereign of Frost clicked its tongue as 2 of its comrades disappeared from the view. Out of the 5 kings that had gathered, only 3 remained. A muscular giant of a figure threw a question at the Sovereign of Frost. As if it was waiting for this chance, the ancient white phantom showed the dagger that used to be stabbed into its shoulder. Its tip was gleaming in a greenish hue. More precisely, it was the poison of a manticore. It might not be effective against sovereigns, but it was still a fatal substance powerful enough to rot away the flesh of the regular denizens of the Chaos world just from simple, innocuous contact. That man had coated his blade with the poison in preparation of the future events. It was indeed a meticulous and smart thing to do. But it was also not the Shadow Sovereign's original style. This was the clear evidence that the human was in charge of that body. The Sovereign of Frost respectfully asked the 2 remaining comrades. Its powers were about the same compared to the Shadow Sovereign, who was still a mere human. However, if 2 other sovereigns supported its cause, then it was sure of subjugating the human Shadow Sovereign. The 2 remaining kings exchanged glances between each other before nodding their heads. The Sovereign of Frost swore in its heart that it'd teach the true meaning of terror to that puny little human responsible for wounding its shoulder with a dagger. The corner of the ancient white phantom's lips curled upwards. To fill the vacant association president's position, an executive-level meeting was held among the vice president and the chiefs of various departments, as well as directors from the regional branch offices. After a lengthy, in-depth discussion between the board of directors and myself, we decided to nominate Chief Wu Jinqiao as the new association president. The person in question, Wu Jinqiao, hadn't been told before the meeting, so rather understandably, he raised his head up in great surprise. He quickly looked at the vice president. But why me? His eyes were silently asking this question, and as a reply, the vice president stared straight back while pulling the head of the microphone closer. Chief Wu has learned what the job entails by serving our late association president from the closest vantage point. Not to mention, he possesses more than adequate power to make other hunters acquiesce as well, and lacking in several key areas to take on that role. Not only are there executives holding higher offices than mine, aren't I too young to hold such an important office? He was only in his mid-30s. We have you, the vice president. What about the directors of the executive board? Directors from the various regional branch offices. Wu Jinqiao looked at the faces of all these powerful men and asked the vice president once more. There are this many excellent candidates present, so why am I being nominated as the replacement for the late association president, sir? The vice president switched his mic off. The official stance of the board of the directors had been communicated in full by now, so it was time to get to the meat of the matter, the unofficial stance. The mic being switched off prompted the attending staff members to pay even greater attention. No personnel within the association, including myself, possesses the ability to persuade South Korea's greatest combat potential. The greatest combat potential affiliated with the Hunters Association. There was no need to mention that person's name as everyone present could already picture his face. The special authority rank hunter capable of shifting a country with his individual power had to kneel before Xiang Jinwu. How could a measly little association demand anything from someone like that? The only thing they could do was to politely make a request and wait patiently for a reply. That was all. Just like how the association president Go Gun-Hui was able to rescue the Jeju Island raid team by borrowing Hunter Xiang's power, the organization needed someone, a line of communication as it were, to request for his aid once more in the future. And the closest person to Hunter Xiang Jinwu currently working for the association was Wu Jinqiao. That alone was enough of a qualification. The vice president had spoken his opinion on the subject matter to the board of directors, and they, in turn, agreed with his analysis. And now, the staff members sitting inside the conference room were also nodding along as well. Feeling somewhat excited by his first trip to Asia, he spoke to the clerk manning the immigration checkpoint in a clearly eager voice. Is this Hunter Xiang Jinwu's country? Pardon? Why yes, it is. The clerk got flustered and nodded his head. Lennart Nierman formed a satisfied smile. He'd soon be able to have a chat with the world's strongest hunter. But then, a huge, hulking man standing close behind him spoke up in irritation. Hey, if you're planning to waste time here, get out of my way. Thick veins suddenly popped up in Lennart Nierman's once peaceful face. Who dares to? Look here, friend. What you said just now, you think you can repeat word for word straight to my face? Lennart Nierman stood with a heavy frown etched on his face. The man in front of him, taller than the German by at least a head, took off his own sunglasses and growled menacingly. Get the FCK out of my way. Lennart Nierman immediately recognized who this burly man was and his expression hardened like a rock right there, and then he hesitated before opening his mouth. Please, go ahead first. Thomas Andre used his wide shoulders to brush past the German hunter and stepped into immigration control. The act of apologizing was the job reserved for Laura following him from close behind. What a giant he was, it was not for nothing that people attached the nickname of Goliath to him. Thomas Andre discovered the face of the immigration officer rapidly turning pale, and put the sunglasses back on before forming a genial smile. Is this Mr. Xiang's country? Within the Jin Guild office, for Yu Jinho, this office had become far more comfortable than his own place. But right this moment, it felt as if every passing minute was as agonizingly long as an hour. He sneaked a glance at the clock hanging on the wall. It said 16:10 p.m. It had been over 2 hours since that man had shown up here. Gulp. Worried that his unconscious saliva swallowing had made too much noise, Yu Jinho quickly sneaked a glance at the unannounced guest to the side. Unfortunately, his gaze ended up meeting the guest's eyes hidden behind a pair of sunglasses. The big man replied with a refreshing grin. Yu Jinho forced his stiff facial muscles to form a grin of his own, or something that roughly resembled one, and hurriedly averted his gaze elsewhere. Thick sweat drops formed on his forehead. He then hurriedly pulled out his poor phone and tried to call his dear Hyung Nim, but it was a waste of time. It had been 2 days since the last communication with Hyung Nim. For some reason, he wasn't picking up his phone at all. Yu Jin-ho lowered his phone and closed his mouth real tightly. It was the same story for other employees of the guild. These talented individuals who chose to work for the Ajin Guild after seeing its potential were all overwhelmed by this awkward atmosphere, and, as if they had made a promise to do so, resolutely maintained this heavy silence. Of course, none of this was their fault. No, anyone who found themselves in a similar situation would react in the same manner. Especially so, when the man sitting on a chair by the corner of the office happened to be one of the most powerful hunters in the entire world, who also happened to be known as the man with one of the shortest fuse in the world. Not only that, the owner of this office was the very man who beat this hunter to a pulp and sent him to the hospital. So, how could anyone be able to smile and jovially chat amongst themselves in front of this man? He was, of course, Thomas Andre. The hunter standing on top of the world had come to visit Ajin Guild to meet Jin Woo. The automated door to the guild slid open. The heads of every single employee, including Yu Jin-ho, instantly snapped in that direction. Right away, his eyes grew wide. Yu Jin-ho jumped up from his seat in sheer joy and spoke in a voice that contained the desperate pleading hearts of everyone working for this guild. I was wondering why there were so many reporters camping outside. But this. Jin Woo helplessly stared at Thomas Andre, grinning back at him. Looking at that expression, the American didn't seem to be hung up over what happened before. So what brought him all the way out here? Funnily enough, though, it was Yu Jin-ho who welcomed Jin Woo way before Thomas Andre could. Hyung Nim, why couldn't I get a hold of you for so long? Well, I was busy. Hang on a minute, now that I see your clothes. Yu Jin-ho faltered and stopped moving. Jin Woo's clothing bore countless pieces of evidence of the harsh battles he must have gone through. It was like looking at Hyung Nim after he concluded his giant monster hunting trip. If Hyung Nim was fighting non-stop, to the point he couldn't contact anyone for 2 days straight, then just how many monsters were sent back to hell by Hyung Nim's short swords? It was at this point in time that Thomas Andre stood up leisurely from the chair to walk up to Jin Woo. Since he was such a big dude, to begin with, he didn't need to take that many steps to close the distance between him and his target. Soon, the American stood before Jin Woo. Hang on. They aren't going to fight again in here, right? The guild employees were unaware of these two's current relationship, so understandably, they were busy swallowing nervous saliva as their eyes locked onto the two men standing before each other. The sounds of their racing hearts were so loud that Jin Woo's ears were actually aching right now from the noise assaulting him. Mr. Seong, Thomas Andre extended his hand first. Jin Woo grinned and held the offered hand to shake it. What brings you to Korea? Oh, that. Thomas Andre recovered his wits and formed another smile. Didn't I promise you before? I told you that I'll buy a meal once my arm heals up. He raised his completely healed left arm and waved it around. And, also, Jin Woo sneaked a glance at the clock on the wall. It was almost 4:30 in the afternoon. The time was obviously too late for lunch, but it was also a bit too early for supper. Jinna killed her footsteps and sneaked like a crafty little cat to clothes and her mom busying washing dishes. Either mom didn't hear her daughter's footsteps, or maybe she did hear them but decided to pretend that she didn't. She didn't react to Jinna closing the distance. And then, in the end, Jinna got close enough to hear her mom's breathing before hugging her tightly. Mom, too bad for all of her efforts, though her mother didn't seem to be surprised at all. She simply responded with a gentle voice. Are you feeling bored? NG, I am. Appa doesn't want to come home, and Mom doesn't want to play with me. While Mom was sleeping in the hospital, Jin Woo performed the role of the substitute mother to his sister. To help Jinna focus on her studies, he did his best to act as the sole breadwinner and took care of all the chores around the family home. To her, he was her sibling, her parent, and at the same time, her friend. That was why Jinna often missed her Appa's presence around the family home as he grew busier and busier every day. Every single one of her fellow countrymen knew her Appa's face and his name by now, but what was the point if she couldn't really get to see him anymore? And so, here she was, trying to fill the hole Jin Woo had left behind with her mom and her warm words of encouragements. Jinna clung to her mom's back like a cicada holding onto a tree for a while before opening her mouth. Mom, let's move house. Mom's hands momentarily stopped moving before resuming their actions. A smile formed on her lips again. Do you want to move to somewhere else? Yeah. But what will we do? Mom really likes this place, you know. Why do you like such an old apartment? Jinna lightly rebuked her, but Mom simply smiled back and her hands continued to move briskly. Actually, Jinna knew why her mom didn't want to leave this old apartment. She knew the reason why her mom still persisted in staying here while paying the monthly rent, when her Appa was making the kind of money that regular people would never get to touch in their lifetime. She was still waiting for her missing husband, her children's father. She was hoping that, maybe one day, he'd stumble back here. Jinna couldn't remember much about her father now and felt that waiting for him was a waste of time. But her brother hadn't mentioned moving house again after he heard Mom's reasoning. Still, I like this apartment. Mom gently persuaded her daughter again, prompting Jinna to spin on her heels to leave, her cheeks puffing up unhappily. Mom quickly turned around and looked at Jinna with a face that said, "I forgot." She had just remembered that the weather forecast warned of rainfall later in the evenings. "Sweetie, can you take the washing from the veranda and bring them in?" "Mom, you only call me sweetie when you need me to do stuff." Still, she didn't mind being called that, as evidenced by her happy humming as she made her way to the veranda. As befitting of Jinna, who was more or less an expert at performing chores like this, she quickly took down the washings and placed them in the basket. But then, her rapid hands suddenly stuttered to a halt. She realized that the sky above had darkened even before she noticed it. Did the rain clouds arrive already? Naturally, she raised her head up to look above, and her eyes opened incredibly wide next. The basket filled with washed clothes fell out of her hands. Even though Seoul was infamous for its clogged roadways, such a traffic jam seemed improbable in the middle of a weekday. Did another gate pop up in the middle of the road again? The overall atmosphere of the road seemed far too suspicious for something as simple as that. In fact, all the drivers had stopped their cars and stepped outside to look up into the sky. It wasn't just the drivers, either. Even the pedestrians on the sidewalks, people on the zebra crossings, every single one had come to a dead stop and was looking up at the sky above their heads. Wu Jinqiao dazedly stared at the sky before a look of pure, unadulterated shock took over his face. How can something like that be? "Oh, Mr. Xiang, you probably have no idea how long I waited for this moment." Thomas Andre welcomed Jin Woo into his hotel suite with open arms. "It was true that you'd feel great about receiving gifts, but the joy of giving itself shouldn't be underestimated, as well." From the time Jin Woo mentioned that he needed new short swords to up until now, Thomas Andre had been counting the days he'd get to hand over the greatest weapons ever made, sleeping within his guild storage, to his new friend. Thomas Andre snapped his fingers, prompting his bodyguards to bring out a large box covered in a sheet of fabric. Even if it was ostensibly a gift, Jin Woo didn't really want anything to begin with, so he stared at the box with disinterest. But then, as the bodyguards got closer and closer, his eyes became equally sharper and sharper as well. Something inside that box was resonating with his magical energy. Thomas Andre easily caught the changes in Jin Woo's expression and inwardly punched the air. "That's what I'm talking about." Hunter Xiang Jin Woo would recognize the weapons, while said weapons would recognize their new owner. Thomas Andre predicted that they would naturally recognize each other, and as expected, he was proven right at this moment. It was possible that these weapons had been hiding inside the Scavenger Guild storage unit where not even a strand of outside light entered, biding their time just for this very moment. "This here is my repayment for the favor you've shown to my guild members and to myself." Thomas Andre grasped the corner of the fabric and carefully pulled it away. The sheet slid off smoothly and revealed what it had been hiding all this time. Hang on, could they even be called short swords? Jin Woo grew doubtful almost immediately. The blades of these weapons were definitely shorter than a long swords, yes, but then again, they were so much longer than a regular short swords, too. However, what caught his attention wasn't the puzzling length of the short swords themselves. No, it was actually their ice-white blades. Jin Woo was familiar with the concept of crafting blades out of non-metallic materials. As a matter of fact, the very first weapon he acquired inside the first instant dungeon was the poison fang of Kasaka. Thanks to the memories of that time, Jin Woo could guess just which monster's fang was used as raw material to craft this pair of short swords. Besides, there was only one creature capable of emitting this kind of aura from a part of its remains. Kamish. Jin Woo involuntarily whispered that name out, prompting Thomas Andre to shake his head while clapping his hands, feeling impressed. "To think, you'd correctly guess the base material used for these guys just from one look." Jin Woo's guess was correct. But then, because he was right, he became puzzled about something else. "Hang on, I thought Kamish's remains were in safekeeping with the Hunter Bureau. Because the American government wanted the intact corpse, we gave up on that monster completely. We got something else even more valuable than money from that deal, anyway." Thomas Andre recalled the raid back then and grinned meaningfully. "However, Kamish's biggest and sharpest fang. When that thing tried to bite me, I yanked out one such fang, and it was given to me as a souvenir. The problem was, there were no awakened capable of crafting weapons out of stripped materials from a DMN dragon, besides one single man. That was." Thomas Andre added that, With the master craftsman responsible for the creation of these two genuine masterpieces having passed away due to old age, there would never be another weapon crafted out of the dragon corpse in this world again. The fang's length wasn't nearly long enough to make a proper longsword, so they were made into short swords back then. Who knew that decision would pay off now? Thomas Andre recounted the situation of all those years ago, his expression remaining bright and cheerful. And now, these are yours. Finally, the best weapons in the world had met the best owner in the world. Thomas Andre did his darndest to calm his fluttering heart, and studied Jin Woo's response. The latter pulled one of the short swords out. Shiwak. As if the weapon was waiting for it, it came off without any resistance whatsoever. The mechanical beep went off in Jin Woo's head as soon as he grasped the short sword, and he quickly swallowed his saliva. Shortly afterwards, the detailed explanations on the weapon popped up in his view. What? Jin Woo doubted his own eyes right away. This couldn't be real. He was completely taken aback by the nonsensical attack value of this weapon and hurriedly summoned out his current main weapon. The Demon King's Short Sword. Rarity S. Type Short Sword. Attack plus 220. A short sword taken from the Demon King. Baron. Using two Demon King's short swords will activate a set effect. Set effect 2 becomes 1. Extra attack power equal to the current strength stat will be added to each short sword. This blade's attack power would shoot way past the 500 mark when his current strength stat of over 300 was added on top. He had always thought that such a set effect would make this short sword plenty useful for his cause. But then, the attack value of the new short sword in his hand was. Jin Woo compared the stats for both short swords and began freaking out inwardly. How can this even be possible? Jin Woo's gaze was fixed to the short sword crafted out of Kamish's fang. Its utterly unbelievable attack power could be seen floating above the weapon. Rarity. Type Short Sword. Attack plus 1500. Top quality short sword fashioned from the sharpest fang among the dragon's teeth by the expert's hands. The blade's sharpness has no equal in this world. It also boasts excellent sensitivity towards mana, and can become greatly strengthened depending on the wielder's capability. The explanation seemed to go on forever. However, nothing besides the attack damage entered his eyes. 1500. Just the pure attack damage. Never mind any added options. Just the base damage dealt was 1500. After recalling that the higher attack damage would make it easier to slice up the enemy, Jin Woo couldn't even begin to imagine just how scarily effective this short sword was going to be. The most expensive broadsword's attack damage barely cracked past the 1000 mark. Even if this weapon was sold in the store, it was still a broadsword boasting 1000 damage. But a measly little short sword was 1500. Just purely from the perspective of the attack damage, won't it be the same thing as me wielding two broadswords in each of my hands? Whoa there, Mr. Seong. Even if I activate my reinforcement skill to increase my defense, that blade will still cut me down. I hope you ain't thinking of killing me with my own gift, right? Of course, Jin Woo wasn't thinking of doing that. He replied to Thomas Andre's odd exaggeration with a chuckle and focused back on the short sword. Thomas Andre had experienced all sorts of craziness in his life, but even he couldn't hold back his shocked gasp from leaking out of his mouth. From Jin Woo's hand, from the entirety of the short sword itself, a blackish aura was slowly rising up. That was why. This short sword is. It's responding to my magic energy. Thomas Andre stopped looking at Jin Woo and shifted his gaze over to her. You still think I made a mistake? Thomas Andre's meaningful gaze prompted Laura to shake her head quickly. As long as these short swords were to be pointed in the direction of the monsters and not other humans, Thomas Andre's decision should be seen as irrefutable. The weapon would find its rightful owner. Even as a regular person who couldn't sense any magical energy, Laura understood what was going on here in an instant. So, how do you like my present, Mr. Seong? Is it really okay for me to receive something like this for free? What do you mean, for free? Thomas Andre erased that semi-permanent smile off his face and formed a serious expression next. Actually, I think it's a cheap price to pay for the lives of my guild members as well as myself. In that case, thank you. I'll gladly accept them. If you're willing to do that, well, I'm happy to. As the atmosphere between the two hunters standing at the very apex of the world grew warmer and more cordial, Jin Woo and Thomas Andre both stopped moving at the same time. Laura and the bodyguards didn't even have the chance to panic at the sudden stiffness in the two men's expression, because Thomas Andre opened his mouth before they could. Mr. Seong, just now, that. Jin Woo briefly nodded his head. That ominous sensation that brushed past his backside, Thomas Andre must have felt something quite similar to that. It came from the sky. As if they had a prior agreement, both men shot up from their seats and quickly stood next to the window. Jin-Woo spat out a gasp. Thomas Andre discovered the same thing and his eyes visibly quaked. Just how could a thing like that appear in the middle of the sky? The American hunter stared at the massive gate floating up high in the sky and muttered loudly, "I can hardly believe this. I've never seen a gate that huge before. Even the gate that spat out Kamish wasn't as big as that beastard up there." The thing was, though, Jin-Woo had seen a gate with similar dimensions before. Within the data the Stone Angel statue played for him back then. He saw winged soldiers pour out in their droves from a gate high up in the sky. The massive size of the gate covering the heavens above the city of Seoul was almost an exact match to the gate he saw within the data. Just from recalling the sight of all those soldiers painting the sky silver, Jin-Woo felt this shudder, a jolt, buzzing from the back of his neck. Hang on. Could it be that the identity of the massive amount of Magisphere pooling in Seoul's sky is that thing? Jin-Woo became utterly speechless. Even Thomas Andre, even Laura, and even their bodyguards, all of them failed to close their slack jaws. Reporters from various nations carried serious, even grave, expressions and spoke their mother tongue towards the camera lenses. I have been warning the relevant authorities about the unknown massive energy gathering in the various spots in the atmosphere for a while now. The giant gate appearing in the skies of Seoul is merely the beginning, I fear. We will be seeing gates just as horrifying as that one over the skies of many other countries in the future. What you're implying there is, Doctor, there are more than one or two places with such ominous phenomena in the world. That's what I'd like to emphasize today. The scientist then went on to explain again what he told the hunters participating in the International Guild Conference. Doctor, you have been researching the gates and monsters for a very long time, am I correct? You're correct. In that case, can you tell us your opinion on what would be the smartest response we can come up with in this situation? Not just the audience members present, but even all the viewers at home watching their TV sets, leaned forward to pay closer attention to the good scientist's next words. Unfortunately for them, what he said was something everyone could say, too. We can only pray. He shifted his gaze over to the audience members and continued on. We can only pray that this unprecedented event doesn't end in tragedy. Jin-Woo riding on the back of the Sky Dragon Kaisel drew closer to the gate. Once he got near its bottom, the DMN thing looked more like an endlessly stretching lake rather than an actual gate. What a near overwhelming size it was. A regular hunter wouldn't have been able to endure this extraordinary amount of magical energy leaking out from the gate itself. But Jin-Woo remained unaffected and aloof, starting from the moment he decided to check this thing out personally. For the first time ever since becoming an awakened, he encountered a rather strange situation. He couldn't enter the gate. His hand couldn't enter the gate as it got blocked off by the black screen. It was as hard as a solid wall. If it was a regular wall, I could have broken it down, but he pushed with everything he had, but this wall didn't even budge. Jin-Woo knocked on the screen next, and his lips closed shut in a straight line. It's different. A gate where Awakened couldn't pass through. Indeed, this one was different from all the other gates that preceded it. If so, would the things waiting inside be different from everything else that had emerged before? Whatever the case may be, whatever came out, his family and friends were below this gate. He had no plan of letting them easily get past him. It was then, the Hunter-issued smartphone, which he left on in the vibrate-only mode, suddenly began writhing around inside his pocket. Hello, Seong Hunter Nim. Please speak. My apologies. I can hardly hear your voice. Should I call you some other time? Jin-Woo glanced down at Seoul's skyscrapers, now small enough to resemble toy building blocks, and grinned to himself. There's no need for that. Actually, I'm somewhere pretty high up at the moment. Anyway, have you found out what I asked you about? Yes. We couldn't locate a single gate, Hunter Nim. Not one new gate has appeared. Yes, that's correct. We couldn't be sure if this was a phenomenon unique to us or not, so we contacted hunter agencies in other countries. But all the new gates suddenly vanished from the world when the supermassive gate appeared above the skies of Seoul. It had been about 3 hours since this supermassive gate had appeared in the air. What were the odds of every gate in the entire world all coincidentally vanishing at the same time? It's not a coincidence, obviously. May I ask why you wished for us to find the locations of the highest ranking gates? It was a bit troubling to honestly answer that. Well, he couldn't really come out and say that he just wanted to test the short swords boasting 1,500 attack damage he got from Thomas Andre as gifts before this uselessly huge gate opened up, now could he? In that case, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so someone needs to plant an apple tree, don't you agree? Oh, an apple tree, I see. It's a wonderful saying. In a certain top luxury hotel in Seoul, There was a man wordlessly looking down at the cars trying to escape the city clogging the streets below from his suite's window. He was Thomas Andre. Laura quietly approached him from behind. Her hands were grabbing onto the travel case filled with her luggage. "Master, will you still not leave with us?" "That's right." Thomas Andre lightly tapped the window with his finger. He was pointing at the gate. "How can I leave behind something that big and beautiful and run away?" "It is big, but beautiful, sir." Thomas Andre's eccentricity was well documented by now, but for him to say that horrifyingly huge and ominous gate was beautiful, just as Laura, his manager, was feeling puzzled by his declaration, he turned around to look at her. "Anything that makes your heart palpitate is beautiful." He placed his hand on his own chest to confirm his heart pulsating there. Ever since he saw the gate, his heart had been racing non-stop with nary a sign of fatigue. From the dragon spitting out flames, that massive gate, and even the power of Hunter Seong Jin-woo, all of them are beautiful things to me. He couldn't be understood by normal logic. Laura shook her head helplessly, but still couldn't hide her smile either. Thomas Andre lowered his hand away from his chest and grinned brightly. "Besides, all gates have disappeared, so what's the point of going back now? However, the Hunter Bureau is getting worried, sir." "Worried?" she said. Thomas Andre began chuckling at the notion of someone being worried about his well-being. "What a funny notion that is, worrying about me. Is there any place safer than right next to Hunter Seong Jin-woo?" Even Laura forgot what she wanted to say after hearing Thomas Andre's words. It was no secret that the Hunter Bureau had asked Seong Jin-woo to protect the world's top-ranked hunters. Thomas Andre smiled back at the clearly speechless Laura and turned away from her. He stared at the gate that had exceeded the classification of huge and entered the realm of supermassive. It floated high up in the skies above Seoul, its surface quietly rippling. "If that thing's not stopped here, then there will be no future for us anyway." A calamity that even Seong Jin-woo may not be able to stop would occur 8 more times around the world. Who would be able to stop them? Thomas Andre himself, or China's Liu Zhaijing, maybe other special authority rank hunters. What an absurd notion that was. "That's why I wish to witness everything." Thomas Andre's gaze drifted off towards Laura's reflection on the glass, and a smile floated onto his lips again as he spoke. "I wish to witness whether this will be the curtain call of human history, or the beginning of a new chapter." Inside the empty gymnasium, "Oh, my king." Baru was so moved by the display of his king's power that he urgently dashed out to kneel in front of Jin-woo. This humble and weak servant can't hide his deep, heartfelt emotions from his liege's bottomless, limitless power. It seemed that Jin-woo really needed to block the historical drama channel on TV for the time being. It'd be sad news for his mother, who enjoyed watching those dramas, but still, of course, it wasn't as if he couldn't understand the reason for Baru's overexcitement. Jin-woo's own heart was pounding away from this power that exceeded his wildest imagination. After all, the scale of destruction the Kamish's wrath left behind. Would a dragon large enough to cover the sky attacking at full power cause such annihilation? Both in terms of sharpness or destructiveness, these short swords easily exceeded his previous weapons by a great deal. A pleased smile formed on his lips as he alternated his gaze between the 2 Kamish's wrath shortswords before storing them in his inventory. Well, now that the testing is over, it was time to take care of the aftermaths. Jin-woo had been drunk on the power of his new weapons, but he eventually came back down to earth. And after he saw the crumbled wall of the gymnasium, he felt his own heart crumble to pieces as well. He borrowed this place for a little while, yet he messed it up to such a degree. What was he supposed to do now? Jin-woo deeply deliberated on his options before contacting the association president Woo Jin-cheol on the phone. Association president. Please, I want you to stay calm and listen to what I have to say. You see, I have around 300 ants that do really fantastic work, and that's enough for today." Cha Hyun's hand stopped swinging the wooden sword. She had been training so hard that her white dobok had been soaked through with her sweat and clung onto her figure. She turned around to face her instructor. He was an elderly man wearing an aged dobok. This man, who was missing an arm, gestured to her that she should take a seat. Cha Hyun wordlessly nodded before politely kneeling down on both knees and placed the wooden sword beside her. "I can't help but sense that, lately, Lady Hyun's blade contains a trace of hesitation. I'm worried that, by chance, you have developed a sense of fear in your heart." Cha Hyun couldn't answer. Song Kai-yul was a hunter like her, and even though he operated a dojo, he still went out to hunt down monsters whenever the association requested his participation. And so, he could very well understand where her fear was coming from. The gate that none had seen before, and no one also could tell just what kind of unimaginably terrifying monstrosities would emerge from there. Just because one was strong, that didn't mean they couldn't get scared. No, on the contrary, they felt to their bones the kind of fear that normal, powerless people couldn't feel precisely because they were strong. Song Kye-yeol closed his eyes as if he was reflecting back on his past and slowly nodded his head. I'm sure you're scared. Indeed, why shouldn't you be? I also felt the same way. Of course, the monsters that I fought can't be compared to those you have fought. But when I lost my arm, it was then. Cha Hee-in's hunter issue smartphone, the one tucked away in the corner of the dojo so it wouldn't get in the way, began ringing loudly. A hunter should answer her phone. Yes, forgive me, instructor. Cha Hee-in briefly bowed her head before running over there to pick up the phone. And then, Song Kye-yeol had been waiting for her to end the call so he could continue on with his story, only to see that Cha Hee-in's expression was getting brighter and brighter with every passing second. She was definitely trying to hide it, but since she was usually so expressionless in her everyday life, even Song Kye-yeol could easily spot the changes in her expression. She ended the call and cautiously walked over to his location. Instructor Nim, there's an appointment I need to get to, so I should go. Her cheeks were flushed warm. Seeing her eyes now filled with vitality, Song Kye-yeol realized that his thoughts were off the mark. The hesitation evident in her sword wasn't born from fear. Indeed, you should. Of course, you need to. Song Kye-yeol dazedly nodded his head and gave her his permission. Well, then, Cha Hee-in's goodbye was kept brief and she left the dojo in light, cheery steps. He stared at her departing back and belatedly, a gentle smile floated up on his lips. Ah, so that's what it was. While wondering who the lucky fella receiving the love of such a wonderful and fine young woman could be, an expression of contentment floated up on Song Kye-yeol's face, one that was just as happy as his valued disciple had shown. Hey, isn't that Hunter Seong Jin-woo? Where? Oh, it really is Seong Jin-woo. It was the weekend and many people came to visit a certain theme park. They all recognized Jin-woo's face among the visitors and stared at him with eyes filled with amazement. Who's the lady next to him? Is she his girlfriend? Hold up, isn't she Hunter Cha Hee-in from the Hunters Guild? Oh, this is huge. What the heck? Are the two of them dating now? There was a woman next to Jin-woo. She was famed for always maintaining a clean short hairstyle to ensure that nothing would hinder her movements. She was Cha Hee-in, of course. She slightly lowered her head as if she couldn't really get used to all the attention from the people surrounding them, and whispered in a small voice, "Do you enjoy going to places like this theme park?" Jin-woo replied with a grin. It's not that I enjoy it, but I wanted to come here at least once in my life, you see. Cha Hee-in stared at Jin-woo's current childlike expression with his previous ice-cold demeanor when slicing up monsters nowhere to be seen. Only then did she realize how fast her heart was racing right now. Too bad for her. The man walking alongside her just so happened to be truly exceptional among the rank S hunters. Cha Hee-in's cheeks flushed red by a lot after realizing that he must have heard her pounding heart as well. She tried to divert Jin-woo's attention, even if only by a little, by changing the topic of the conversation. If you wanted to come here, then why me? Miss Hee-in is the only friend I have. Pardon, since when did she become friends with Hunter Seong Jin-woo? She racked her brain trying to recall the memory she clearly didn't possess before she unconsciously looked up. That's when her eyes locked onto Jin-woo's rather mischievous grin. You know, in front of that strange stone statue. Ah, that day. Back on that day when she and her colleagues entered the dual dungeon to rescue Jin-woo, that angel statue asked her the question, didn't it? What is your relationship with Seong Jin-woo? A friend? It seemed that Jin-woo remembered that brief exchange. You were listening back then. Well, yeah, somehow I could hear you. I have better than average hearing, you see. She felt a tiny bit wronged here somehow, but she knew that even back then, she ended up being saved by him rather than saving him, instead. It was then she became conscious once more of just how many times Jin-woo had saved her life. By the way, what was the identity of that strange dungeon? She had been waiting to hear his explanation on this one ever since that day. Unfortunately, he figured that now wasn't the right time to tell her. Can I tell you later when I've managed to properly sort out my own thoughts first? Even I can't tell what's what at the moment. Cha Hee-in nodded her head to say that she understood. When their conversation entered a bit of a lull, Jin-woo began taking a look around their surroundings. Excuse me, please look over here. I'm your biggest fan. Just like when a celebrity was walking on a busy street. People crowded around the two like a swarm of bees and were busily snapping away with their smartphones. Jin-woo's face was far more well known to regular people than some superstars nowadays. That was because, regardless of which TV channel they tuned into, they would always play clips containing Jin-woo's face ever since that supermassive gate appeared in the air. If this was any other day, he'd simply smile and let it slide. However, he didn't feel like having his day off being disrupted like this, especially when he had a company. Come out. The moment Jinwoo issued his command, his own retinue of bodyguards willing to work their butts off for absolutely nothing revealed themselves. They were none other than Ygritte and the elite knights. Around 30 or so knights emerged from his shadow and surrounded both him and Cha Hien in a protective cordon. Wouldn't doing this be even more eye-catching? Well, as long as we aren't bothered, isn't it fine? His words carried this inexplicable persuasive power, and Cha Hien found her head nodding all by itself. Truth be told, she really did feel somewhat better now that all those gazes pouring down on her had disappeared. When she thought about it, she couldn't remember the last time she went out for fun with a relaxed mindset. It had already been almost 2 years since she became a hunter. During this period, not even once did she take a day off to relax. She always remained tense and wasted each hour feeling nervous. On days she wasn't participating in raids, she'd be worried about her colleagues. And when she was in the raid, then she'd be worried about making mistakes. But for today, it's a different story when I'm with him, a man she can depend on. When she was with Jinwoo, it felt as if she no longer had to meet the expectations of her comrades that depended on her and could go back to being just a regular woman living her life. He scanned the theme park's various rides, before pointing at the roller coaster falling at a scary speed from a dizzying height and asked her, "Should we get on that one?" Okay. Since she answered too easily, Jinwoo felt unconvinced and pointed at another ride. "How about that one?" "It's okay, too." "In that case, how about the one next to it?" "That's also okay." "Everything's okay." "Yes, they are all okay." Jinwoo stared at the excited face she made during her answers and simply chuckled to himself. What the heck? I guess I wasn't the only one who wanted to come here. Since she didn't seem to hate this place, Jinwoo's mind could relax even further now. He lightly grasped her wrist and led her to the nearest ride. "Well, then, why don't we ride all of them?" Unfortunately, it wasn't as fun as he imagined. As luck would have it, Jinwoo got to sit on the very front of the roller coaster. While the people behind were screaming their heads off, he spectated on the passing scenery without feeling much of an excitement. Huh? That kid's gonna drop his ice cream pretty soon. Oopsie, I knew it. Hold on, the food court was over that side. But it's still too early to buy dinner, so even though the roller coaster was rushing forward at full tilt, everything seemed to have come to a crawl, like extreme slow motion, to Jinwoo, and he was feeling really bored right now. Around at the same time, he discovered his companion with a similar sort of expression on her face sitting next to him. Smirk. He couldn't help but chuckle here. Jinwoo asked Cha Hien as she continued to swim in her dazed thoughts. "Is it not fun playing around here?" No, it's fun." Since her conversation partner possessed sharp hearing, she found it convenient that she didn't have to shout at him. "Then, why haven't you screamed at least once so far?" They had already ridden on 5 different attractions so far. All of them could be described as top thrill rides to normal people, but she hadn't even muttered out the common awe once yet. She too was a rank S hunter, maybe not as extreme as Jinwoo, but she had also surpassed the realms of normal people by a wide margin as well. Suddenly, he felt rather relieved by the fact that he wasn't the only one so far removed from the other people here. It was then he was tempted to show her the world that he saw. Baru sensed Jinwoo's desire and hurriedly began dissuading him. "It'll be fine. Besides, I'll put you in charge of catching her if she falls off. If you fail to do so, you know already, right?" Now that the voice of dissent had been suppressed, Jinwoo spoke to Cha Hien next. "Instead of this, do you want to ride on something really exciting?" "Something really exciting?" After the roller coaster came to an end, Jinwoo led the still puzzled Cha Hien out to a large plaza. "Hurry, come on up." She realized that Jinwoo had already climbed up on the back of the Sky Dragon and became utterly flabbergasted. You want me to ride that creature?" Cha Hien looked down as the crowd below gradually grew distant and swallowed her saliva. For sure, the sense of tension she felt right now was on another dimension when compared to being on those theme park rides. Almost instinctively, her arms went around Jinwoo's waist. "Hold on to me tight. We're going to fly now." Was there a reason for more explanation now? Because he definitely could feel an incredible amount of pressure being exerted by Cha Hien's arms wrapped around his waist. What the heck? A regular guy would have been folded in half. But this showed how scared she must have been feeling right now. Jinwoo had half succeeded in his mission and spoke loudly with an excited voice. "Kaisel, go faster, faster." As Kaisel began flying at its fastest speed, Cha Hien's screams, heard for the very first time today, resounded out right behind him. They entered the storm clouds where rain and wind wildly lashed out. They flew so close to a mountain range that they could almost touch it. They even flew past the seemingly endless field of snow. But the most beautiful sight still had to be watching the setting sun on top of the ocean. Kaizel gradually slowed down, accompanied by the chilly wind brushing past their cheeks. The two of them watched the sun slowly disappear below the distant horizon, the skies being dyed in the amber-orange hue. Just like the colored sky, Cha-Hyen's eyes as she took in the spectacular sight also gently glowed in that orange hue. Abruptly, she felt curious and just had to ask him, "Mr. Jin-woo, yes, even though you can experience stuff like this, why did we go to that theme park first?" "That theme park? Well," Jin-woo fell into reminiscence and slowly told her the reason. "That's where the gate my dad went missing opened up." Oh, if his father failed and the dungeon break really happened back then, the theme park would have ceased to exist. Yet, it was full of people today. Jin-woo's voice sounded lonely for some reason and Cha-Hyen wordlessly hugged him from behind. Her warmth was transmitted through his back. She spoke to him again. "Thank you." Her sudden thanks prompted him to look behind him, but since she was pressing up close to his back, there was no way he could see the expression on her face. "Pardon me, I wanted to say thank you for everything. You've been helping me out all this time." So, through their bodies pressing against each other, through her warm breaths tickling his neck, and from her powerfully beating heart, he sensed from her what she wanted to say. Indeed, this was enough for him. Jin-woo smiled softly and commanded Kaizel to head in the opposite direction. "Where are we going now?" Cha-Hyen sounded somewhat rueful as she asked him. Jin-woo replied with a smile, "There's something I want to show you." The destination they got to after a lengthy flight wasn't Korea, but Japan. More specifically, an area designated as a restricted zone, which meant that there was not one soul to be found here. Even the wild animals were driven away by the horrible auras oozing off from the monsters, and thus no one lived in this area. In this expansive forest where not even the breathing of a small animal could be heard, Kaizel slowly made its descent. The sky dragon lay flat on the ground and Jin-woo climbed off first. He turned around to assist Cha-Hyen next. "Where are we?" She had been experiencing some extraordinary sights for almost the whole day today, and so she expectantly began scanning her new surroundings with curious eyes. However, besides the near endless sea of trees, she couldn't see anything particularly interesting out here. Jin-woo sneakily bought a blanket from the system's store and laid it down on the ground before opening his mouth. "There's no fun if I let you in on the secret already, so why don't we lie down first?" Eh? Did she hear him wrong? Unfortunately, there was no way that a rank S hunter's hearing would hear such a clear enunciation of words incorrectly. Besides, Jin-woo was already getting ready to lay down on the blanket anyway. "Please, hurry." Seeing how nonchalant he was in his invitation, Cha-Hyen's heart began pounding as if it was about to explode. Are you being serious?" She simply had to confirm his intentions one more time. Too bad for her. Perhaps he didn't show not one bit of hesitation as he nodded his head in a determined way. It was her turn to hesitate, but in the end, she approached the blanket. Jin-woo confirmed this and slowly laid down first. Soon, she too lied down next to him, and as if she had made a big decision about something, she straightened her legs. "I'm ready." Jin-woo looked at Cha-Hyen murmuring with tightly closed eyes and replied to her. "In that case, please open your eyes." When her eyes creaked open just a bit, he wordlessly pointed at the night sky above, towards the cascading light of the stars. Cha-Hyen gasped out inadvertently after looking at the stunning parade of the starlight filling up the heavens. Beautiful. Could she be able to describe this spectacle with any other words besides beautiful? Jin-woo was pleased by her response and smiled in satisfaction. "I arrived here to deal with a dungeon break and ended up looking at the night sky." Back then, he felt just too fatigued and wanted to lay his weary body down and close his eyes to rest. But, because the surroundings were so bright, he couldn't go to sleep. He got irritated and opened his eyes, and that's when he got to see this brilliant echo of stars enveloping the sky. Just seeing them made his heart melt down that night. "I thought that it'd be wonderful to share this night sky with someone else, you see." The only thing filling up this still forest with nary a squeak of sound was the endless river of starlight. Jin-woo wanted to share this feeling, this moment, with someone else. Fortunately, the result of his desire was this strong sense of relief. He felt relieved by the fact that there was someone close by who could also feel what he had felt then. And his heart, once hardened and lumpy, seemed to soften and become untangled now. But then, this happened. He felt the warmth of Cha-Hyen's hand climbing up on top of his own. "Can I hold your hand?" But she was already holding it, though. Jin-woo smiled before shifting his hand to interlock his fingers with hers. The cold yet smooth hand of a woman filled his palm up. So still, so quiet. Countless starlight sparkled and rained down as the heads of two young people slowly became one. Next day. Hang on. If Seong Jin-woo and Cha-Hyen marry and have a kid together, wouldn't Seong Jin-woo Jr. go around killing every single monster in the entire world? You think we got Xiang Jinwu because his parents were both super duper top hunters. You sound like a little kid who don't know how hunters awaken their powers. Plus even then, doesn't those two dating make you feel excited? Plus I wish it was true. Them having a marriage argument will be an epic encounter that flattens their surroundings. LOL. I live in the outskirts of Seoul, and when I saw that gate floating in the sky while traveling near Gangnam, I thought the world was coming to an end. But now that I see the hunters going on a date like this and enjoying their lives, I feel like there's hope left for us still, and I'm relieved by that. Plus I hope TV stations will stop playing special reports on the gate now. Plus Xiang Jinwu Hunter Nim, Cha-hee and Hunter Nim, whether it's a supermassive gate or a super duper massive gate, please stop it for us. Jinwu was the first one to open his eyes. He must have been exhausted from yesterday as she hadn't woken up from her sweet slumber yet. Just how long had it been since he greeted the morning together with someone else? Jinwu cautiously got up to make sure not to rouse Hien and walked over to the nearby forest. It was definitely around here. He found the stream he used the last time he was here and washed up. It was at this moment he sensed Cha-hien's movement from afar as she slowly woke up from her slumber. Jinwu deliberately made some noises as he approached her. She quickly discovered him and let out a soft sigh of relief. He smiled and greeted her. "Good morning. Did you rest well?" Her complexion reddened for some reason. She replied while averting her gaze away from him. "Yes." Jinwu sent her a puzzled look, prompting her to sneakily raise her head. "Where were you coming from?" Hien's question sounded cautious. He used the towel around his neck to rub his still moist hair and replied, "I was washing myself, actually." Now that he thought about it, she must have wanted to clean herself just as badly, too. Especially with all that ocean breeze. Even a little bit of exposure would leave behind plenty of salt on one's skin. Still, I can't let a young lady wash herself in a place like this. Jinwu pondered his options for a bit, before a smile floated up on his lips. "I know a hotel with a killer breakfast nearby, so how about going there for our meal?" Although she didn't verbalize her answer, Hien must have felt really hungry because she immediately nodded her head, her lips firmly closed shut. Jinwu reached out to her and helped her to stand back up before summoning Kaizal out again. Hien tilted her head while looking at the sky dragon unfurl its wings. "But, didn't you say it was nearby?" "Well, it's about a 5-minute distance if I run with everything I have, so would you like to run alongside me, then?" 5 minutes at Jinwu's top speed. Hien quickly calculated just how far that would be in her head, and without saying anything, she climbed on the back of Kaizal. "Yup, it's great that she understands me so quickly." Jinwu grinned and took his place in front of her. Kaizal flapped its wings and flew up. The Koreans had seen Kaizal fairly often on TV, so their reactions were not as severe. But he wondered how the Japanese staff of the hotel would react after seeing his ride. He prayed that the chef working this morning wouldn't be too frightened. It suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The first person to discover it was a middle-aged man who got evaluated as a rank B awakened in the Hunters Association only a few moments ago. Thud. The man ended up bumping shoulders with it appearing suddenly before him in the middle of the busy street and stopped walking right then. "What the?" The man raised his head while chasing after the silhouette of the shadow. There was a big, hulking man of over 2 meters tall standing right before him. This dangerous sense of wild beast oozed out from the man wearing some sort of leather clothing. No, rather than just some sense, this man was a wild beast personified. Since the man's huge physique was so eye-catching, the gazes of the passers-by quickly focused on this person, and the middle-aged man that had run into him. "What's this? Are they going to fight? Wow, look at that man's size. He's no joke. Even Ma Dong-wook would take a bow, man. By the way, that uncle must have lost his mind. He might end up in the hospital at this rate." Now normally, he'd have apologized and stepped aside, but he was a different person compared to the past. He'd no longer suffer the ignominy of kowtowing before his superior, or be ignored by his junior workers. "I'm a rank B awakened now." Not only that, among the upper tier of the rank B, too, there was no need to act subservient towards a regular person like this who only relied on his massive frame. "Oi, you're supposed to apologize when running into someone." When the huge man grabbed the middle-aged man by his head and lifted the poor man up, the passers-by watching began screaming at the top of their lungs. The fear of the predator ingrained into humanity's DNA caused the middle-aged man to wet his pants. And eventually, crack, accompanied by the sounds of something shattering, blood and brain mass splattered to everywhere. The huge man didn't stop there. He began to voraciously devour the sagging, lifeless body of the middle-aged man on the ground. He's eating that man. Wow, what the hell is this? What's going on? The noisy mealtime came to an end in an instant. The huge man wiped the corners of his mouth, still dirty with bits of flesh, with his hand while slowly standing back up. A wild beast. Not even a hint of intelligence could be seen behind the eyes of the huge man. They definitely resembled a wild beast's eyes now. While many people screamed and ran away, there were just as many who had failed to recognize the severity of the situation and continued to spectate on the next actions of this huge man. This wild beast roared out towards the humans around it. The thunderclap-like roar paralyzed all who listened. They stood there on the spot shivering, tears rolling down their cheeks. Before anyone had noticed it, sharp fangs were jutting out gloriously from the huge man's mouth. It was the king of beasts. The roar from the sovereign of beastly fangs bearing its sharp canines reverberated loudly against the entirety of the streets. The association president Wu Jinqiao finally received the report on the horrifying being that appeared in the middle of the city without any prior warning. How many victims so far? At the moment, it's impossible to tally the number of the dead, sir. The thing was first spotted in the district of Myeongdong, and while moving in a straight line, the creature proceeded to kill every human it laid its eyes on. When taken into account the direction this creature has taken, its destination could be. It's the Hunters Association, isn't it? Wu Jinqiao bit his lower lip and clenched his fists. We've got our hands full worrying about the DMN gate right now, but just where did such a monster even? Unfortunately, there was no time to stew in his anger right now. No, he had to come up with a solution to stop that thing somehow. What about Xiang Jinwu Hunter Nim? We still can't contact him. God DMN it. He cursed out involuntarily. Only a few minutes ago, he heard the news that a guild stepped forward to stop this monster only to be annihilated without being able to do anything. The only consolation right now was that the creature moved at a slow pace as if it was waiting for someone to show up. But still, it didn't take a genius to figure out that, as long as it was not stopped soon, the total number of victims would end up being astronomical. In such a situation, the fact that the country's most powerful combat force couldn't be reached was probably the worst news imaginable. It was then, a welcome piece of news came at his way. I just learned that a world-class hunter staying nearby is getting ready to stop the monster. What? Really? Who is it? That is, ranked as the #1 in the German hunter community, Lennart Nierman could sense the aura of the monster approaching closer as it dyed the streets red with blood. Will I be able to win? Even though he was doubtful, as a hunter, there was no way he'd ignore the screams of terror coming from the innocent citizens. And when he took a look at the brightening expressions of the escaping citizens as they recognized him, the hunter ranked 12th in the American Hunter Bureau's Hunter Point list, Lennart Nierman was overcome with this great weight of responsibility bearing down on his shoulders. Yes, it was not a matter of whether he could do it or not. No, he simply had to do it. That was the purpose, the duty of a hunter. Maybe the reason why he ended up staying in Seoul was probably the trickery of fate so that he could stop that monstrosity with his own 2 hands. Lennart Nierman formed a grave but determined expression and undid a couple of buttons on his shirt. Just as he was about to take his step towards the monster that finally revealed itself at the far end of the street, a heavy voice came from behind him. Get out of the way. Jin Wu's smartphone began ringing off the hook as soon as he entered the reception range. From the Hunters Association. His expression hardened when he confirmed who the caller was. Could something bad have happened while he was away for a bit? He quickly answered the call. Xiang Hunter Nim, why couldn't we get a hold of you? I was outside the reception range until a moment ago. Perhaps because of being contaminated by the frequent dungeon breaks, it was almost impossible to contact outside when within that vast ocean of trees. However, he thought it was more than sufficient enough to leave behind his shadow soldiers with those whom he wanted to protect. That's what he believed. Could the supermassive gate have opened up while I was in the forest? But there should have been at least 2 more days left still. A monster has appeared in the middle of Seoul and is going on a rampage. Jin Wu had been feeling energized after enjoying a rare break from the action. But now, he felt as if his heart had fallen to the pit of his stomach. How big is the size of the monster horde? No, there's no horde. It's just one creature. Just one. Currently, all Korean hunters had gathered in Seoul. They were summoned to the city in order to fight against the potential dungeon break from the supermassive gate, so they should be on their toes, getting ready to move at a moment's notice. On top of that, the association was even supplying weapons to those hunters lacking in proper equipment, too. But then, they are getting destroyed by a monster that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. As Jin Wu fell ever deeper into confusion, Wu Jinqiao hurriedly continued on with his explanation. A guild that tried to fight the creature was annihilated in an instant. It looks like the monster is no ordinary creature at all. What about its current location? We believe it's currently near Seoul Grand Hotel. Could this be chalked up to being mere coincidence? The moment Wu Jinqiao mentioned the name of the ultra-luxurious hotel where Thomas Andre was staying, Jin Wu felt this sense of creeping unease tickle him in his throat. I received a call not too long ago that Thomas Andre Hunter Nim was getting ready to fight the monster. But that couldn't be. Just in case, Jin Woo had left a shadow soldier behind with Thomas Andre. The order issued to the soldier was to send a signal right away if something strange is sensed in the immediate vicinity. But then, the target for protection started fighting alone against a monster capable of wiping out a guild, and yet, there was no signal. Hang on. Only now did Jin Woo realize something was off. The signals coming from the shadow soldiers spread throughout Seoul were extremely weak, as if something was interfering with the transmission. What is going on? An enemy possessing incredible power, a special authority rank hunter fighting it. And finally, signals being blocked off. Could it be? One distinct possibility popped up in Jin Woo's head. He asked in a hurry to confirm. Association President, did that monster possess a shadow? Excuse me, please, confirm if that monster has a shadow. Wu Jinqiao's voice seemingly got cut out for a moment, then, before continuing on with greater urgency. How can this be? You're right, Seong Hunter Nim. I just confirmed with the photos, and the monster does not have a shadow. Oh my god. Jin Woo recalled that the ice elf attacking Gogun Huey also didn't possess a shadow, and loudly cried out, "You must never let Thomas Andre fight that monster." There was a good chance that the monster had been aiming for Thomas Andre all along. But they have already. Jin Woo realized that he had no need to listen to any further explanation and tried to activate shadow exchange with the shadow soldier attached to Thomas Andre. Accompanied by a rather ominous-sounding alert noise, a clear holographic message suddenly popped up in his view. Jin Woo tried several times more, but it was the same story. Thomas Andre, the giant of a man large enough to block out the sun? That's Thomas Andre. Lennart Nierman's expression brightened the moment he discovered the American standing behind him. Thomas Andre wordlessly walked past Lennart and slowly went up ahead. Even those screaming people running away from the scene recognized the special authority rank hunter and his hulking physique. He's that American hunter, Thomas Andre. It's the Goliath. The Goliath. Even the first-rate hunter Lennart Nierman felt his heart pound excitedly when seeing Thomas Andre's broad back as he walked forward. Meanwhile, Thomas Andre angrily shouted at the other hunters nearby who were all frozen stiff from the powerful pressure emitted by the unknown monster. Stop standing around like idiots and start evacuating these citizens, you bastards. The roar from the special authority rank hunter was more than enough to blow away the stifling pressure, dulling the thought process of the other hunters. They understood his intention through that thunderous roar and began grabbing those citizens that had fallen behind to drag them far away from Thomas Andre. Veins bulged on Thomas Andre's face as he spotted the bits and pieces of the victims strewn messily about behind this beast. A stinking beast who doesn't know its place has rampaged around for far too long. As if to mock Thomas Andre's rage, the beast bared its fangs covered in bits of flesh in a toothy grin. Putting down a crazed animal was a universal truth, no matter where one was from. Thomas Andre's eyes became incomparably murderous right away. Reinforcement. His muscles transformed like armor and his already hulking physique grew larger and larger than before. As far as one's physical size was concerned, he was a step larger than this monster. To find out the gap in the strength, Thomas Andre rushed towards his target. A tank. People watching and sensing the ground tremble every time he took a step forward instinctively pictured a powerful tank. The beast smacked its lips at the appearance of a new prey and made its move as well. Two giants closed their distance in an instant and stood before each other. At first, they exchanged glances studying their new opponent, and soon, they squeezed their muscles laden with massive magical energy while roaring out at the same time. Two monstrous beings and their fists powerful enough to crush concrete like tofu began exploding out like bullets towards one another. This exchange of fists relied solely on brute force with no consideration towards any type of techniques. Hunters watching on were left absolutely awestruck by this spectacle. Just being kissed by one of those fists would result in instant death for these hunters. But these two were trading such lethal blows without even taking a breather, without even bothering to block them, as if these punches were just light probing jabs. It's working. Thomas Andre grew sure of it now. Pow! His punch caused the beast's head to spin to the side. This heavy sensation of impact got transmitted to his left hand. This attack definitely worked. After losing to Jin Woo, the Goliath felt his confidence had plummeted somewhat, but through this dogfight, he felt it growing back again. The continuous stream of powerful punches pushed the beast gradually backwards. Grabbing hold of this opening, Thomas Andre's fearsome full swing of his fist floored the beastard right into the ground. The beast was shoved away as the concrete below split apart from the sheer force. The creature smashed into the side of a building and demolished its wall. Only then did it finally stop moving. Other hunters watching on punched the air and celebrated, but the person responsible, Thomas Andre himself, didn't display any hints of joy. No, that was wrong. It wasn't as deep as I wanted. The thick dust clouds spread out, obscuring the vision. However, he could still sense the presence of the beast emitting the dense murderous intent from beyond the collapsed debris of the building. Heavy hunks of metal flew out from the dust and at Thomas Andre's location. He smacked these flying cars away from him and quickly activated the skill, Capture, to yank the beast hidden from his sight closer to his position. The resisting beast was brought right up to the American's nose. He immediately activated his strongest skill, Demolition. Muscles on both of Thomas Andre's arms ballooned up until they nearly popped. He slammed down on the ground with everything he had. The horrifying shockwave arising from the ground pummeled the beast. The beast cried out in agony as it was flung into the air before it came crashing back down. Thomas Andre seized upon this chance and jumped on top of the monster, before proceeding to rain down his fists laden with an unbelievable amount of magic energy. The citizens watching the battle between the Goliath and the beast from afar with anxious minds all began raising excited cheers. Even the hunters began breaking out in relieved smiles as well. No matter who saw it, this fight now had a clear victor. It was an overwhelming victory befitting the special authority rank hunter, often referred to as the world's best. However, thicker and thicker drops of cold sweat began forming on Thomas Andre's forehead even as he mercilessly pummeled the beast down below. What is this? What was this anxiety, born from this sensation of a noose gradually tightening around his neck the closer he got to his victory? Each and every one of his attacks was landing splendidly, and the beast being floored down below wasn't showing any signs of resistance. So, why do I feel this anxious, even though I'm clearly in an advantageous position? Fairly quickly, though, Thomas Andre got to discover the source of his anxiety. It was the eyes. From the very beginning of the fight right up until now, the beast had been looking at him with the exact same apathetic eyes, even going so far to completely disregard the indiscriminate outpouring of his attacks. It was as if the thing was mocking him, telling him to try and give his best shot. It was then. He clearly saw it. He saw the beast close its eyes for the briefest of brief moments before opening them to reveal that those eyes, previously resembling that of a human's, now fully resembling a wild predator's. The beast leisurely raised one hand up to easily stop Thomas Andre's two fists swung down with all his might. The American looked at his hands, now held tight and couldn't be pulled back at all, and felt a chill run down his back. The black hair of the beast began to grow longer and longer as its color changed to white. That wasn't all. The nails resembling owls grew lengthier as well, while its fangs grew sharper, too. Soon, whitish fur covered its entire body. A werewolf. Unfortunately, there never had been a single instance of a white werewolf making its appearance in 10 years of humans going on raids. You, just what is your true identity? Thomas Andre threw that question out as he felt this ominous chill from the disgusting, vile magical energy oozing out from the beast's eyes. Too bad. The creature didn't bother to answer him and proceeded to shatter the bones in the human's hands with nothing but sheer physical strength. Unbridled astonishment. The strongest hunter screamed out and everyone else in the vicinity couldn't hide their shock and astonishment. How can this be? All those watching the two beings fight, whether in the location itself or through various screens, prayed fervently in their hearts that this wasn't the end of this battle. Too bad. The beast snatched and then slammed Thomas Andre's wrists into the ground as if to mock their prayers. It was then the beast, in the midst of enjoying the pain of its prey, discovered something odd just beyond the human. The beast stopped its attacks. What it was glaring at, as if to bore a hole into it, was Thomas Andre's shadow. The beast stabbed its hand deep into the shadow and grabbed something within the subspace. When the creature pulled its hand out, an ant soldier hiding inside the human's shadow was dragged out along as well. The beast stood upright again. The ant soldier, its neck tightly grabbed by the powerful grip, desperately struggled, but the monster didn't even budge from the spot. This one was a soldier belonging to the Shadow Sovereign. It was impossible to destroy an immortal soldier like this one through regular means. However, the creature holding onto the ant's neck was no ordinary being, either. The Sovereign of Beastly Fangs was a higher existence. It simply focused the energy inherent within the spiritual body to erase this ant soldier from the very fabric of existence altogether. The ant soldier spat out a short death throw and turned into dust, returning to the void beyond. The beast grinned as it watched the gray ash scatter in the air. It was then Thomas Andre got up and positioned himself behind the beast before anyone had noticed it. He then wrapped his arm around the creature's neck and secured his grip with the other arm. If he lacked teeth, then he'd bite with his gums instead. Thomas Andre continued to gasp out breathlessly and concentrated on this final attack. There would be nothing left after this. His eyes shot wide open in concentration as he clenched his teeth. He heard the displeasing noises similar to bones being crushed into powder. If that was the sound of the enemy's neck breaking, then there was still a chance of victory here. I've done it. Unfortunately, the incoming rush of pain had been slightly delayed by the adrenaline coursing through his body. Thomas Andre bore the full brunt and screamed out in agony. The beast shattered the American's arms, locked onto its neck with nothing but sheer physical hand grip. It then grabbed his head with both hands before proceeding to slam him down on the ground. Viewers watching this scene through their screens saw the Goliath's arms dangling around and quickly averted their gazes. It was a scene they simply couldn't bear to watch with their eyes open. Too bad. The horrifying scene didn't stop there and continued on. The beast pounced on the sprawled Goliath and began biting him. The predator's mealtime had begun. Dozens of sharp, knife-like fangs began tearing into Thomas Andre's skin and made a mess out of his flesh. However, something unexpected happened then. Among the ranks of the hesitating hunters, one man dashed forward like a bolt of lightning and ran straight towards the beast. Boom! The monster had been drunk on the victory and the taste of its loot, so it got caught unaware, and was struck cleanly by this unexpected attack, which resulted in it getting flung away. It was none other than Lennart Nierman. Germany's best hunter quickly stood next to the grievously wounded Goliath. Thomas Andre recognized Lennart and somehow managed to squeeze out his voice. "Run away." However, Lennart shook his hardened face. "I'm also a hunter, you know. Although I'm far weaker than you. You will die." He knew that already. Of course, Lennart knew that. He didn't even have his equipment with him. And his strongest one-hit kill trump card, the skill charge, only managed to shove the beast away. Germany's best hunter, 12th in the world rankings. He knew better than anyone that such things had no meaning in the current situation. Even then, I don't regret anything. Even if this moment turned out to be his last, he'd still choose exactly the same over and over again. Rather than the life of a coward, he would choose to go out in a blaze of glory. I'm not wrong. I am not wrong. Lennart continued to psyche himself up as he glared at the massive power gradually running faster and faster towards him. I'm definitely not wrong. He locked his eyes on the chill-inducing maw of the beast opening up wide as the monster closed the distance in an instant. Lennart summoned up every ounce of energy and swung his fist. For a very moment there, the life he led up until this moment flashed past him like a revolving lantern. He didn't even work that hard, yet this incredible power was handed to him, allowing him to live an overabundant and perhaps undeserved lifestyle. But he did live a happy life, didn't he? That's right, he did. A grin floated up on Lennart's lips as he saw the beast's throat approaching ever closer. Indeed, he was not wrong. Right up until the end, he didn't live an embarrassing life. Just before the beast's maw swallowed his head, Lennart quietly closed his eyes, thinking that there would be no more need to open them again. But then, a sudden noise of explosion coming from his front shocked Lennart and he quickly opened his eyes. After confirming that the shadow soldier attached to Thomas Andre had disappeared, Jin Woo searched for another one near the location and activated Shadow Exchange. But to think that Shadow Soldier just so happened to be the one in Lennart Nierman's shadow. Thanks to that, he got to save the lives of these two men. Jin Woo hurriedly checked Thomas Andre's wounds and breathed a sigh of relief. The American's wounds looked pretty serious, but thankfully, he'd be able to survive. Seong Jin Woo Hunter Nim, thank you for stopping the beastard. My apologies, but can you evacuate Thomas to somewhere safe? Jin Woo politely asked in English, and Lennart nodded his head energetically. Compared to fighting that monstrosity, this job sounded so much easier. Ah, yes, you don't have to worry about that one. The German cautiously lifted Thomas up and hurriedly distanced himself. Meanwhile, Jin Woo shifted his gaze over to the beast, raising its body up. Tangible, horrifying, murderous intent oozed from the creature. He sensed power on another realm compared to other monsters from the beastard. I knew it. His guess was on the money. This thing possessed a similar sort of aura to the ice elf he met earlier. It was, indeed, one of the sovereigns that were hunting down the hunters. The thin, fog-like smoke suddenly coagulated into a singular mass before morphing into a humanoid shape. Isn't that? It was the ancient ice elf, the sovereign of frost, hiding its presence as a fog until now, had finally revealed itself. Jin Woo realized that the fog wrapped around the city was not a natural phenomenon the moment he came in contact with it. And this time, it was from his behind. A weird female voice harsh enough to grate his ears came from behind him, and Jin Woo quickly looked back. And that's where he discovered a spectacle that made him doubt his own eyes. A horde of insects poured out from the sewerage and began merging into one to assume the shape of a humanoid female. Jin Woo's expression hardened, now that he found himself suddenly surrounded by his enemies. And then, he realized it. They gagged his shadow soldiers by confusing the signals, not because they were worried about their hunt being disrupted by him. No, they did that in order to hide the fact that there were more than one of them here. In other words, this was a trap. A trap laid out in the entirety of Seoul in order to box Jin Woo in. Enemies possessing power on another scale altogether, and 3 of them to boot, too. His black heart, sleeping quietly until now, began to pound away madly at the entrance of these 3 incredibly powerful foes. Good. The corners of Jin Woo's lips arched up. These things were thinking that they had managed to surround him. But the thing was, he wasn't alone. In reality, they were the ones surrounded now. Jin Woo kept his senses ultra-sharp in order to not miss their movements and summoned out his army that'd surround his enemies. Come out. New York, London, Shanghai, Paris. Besides these cities, others around the world were all experiencing the phenomenon of their streets being draped in eerie silence right now. People had stopped walking and found themselves unable to tear their eyes away from the many electronic screens installed here and there. Those large screens were continuously showing the breaking news regarding the horrifying tragedy unfolding in the capital city of South Korea, Seoul. Because of the supermassive gate's presence, the world's attention had been focused there already, so it was only normal that the news spread around like a wildfire. Seoul was one of the biggest metropolises in the entire world. But with such a city lying in ruins like that, it implied that their safety couldn't be guaranteed even within their own cities. The tragedy of Seoul didn't feel like an incident happening in some distant country, but something that was happening to them personally. Was that the reason why they felt relieved when Thomas Andre stepped up to put an end to the monster's rampage? The viewers gathered their hands in prayer and with one heart cheered Goliath on. And that was why the streets were filled with elated cries every time Goliath roughed up that beast-like monster. Yes, more, destroy that thing. Unfortunately, the cheering and elated cries filling up the streets soon morphed into shocked silence as Goliath's fists were shattered. His arms were broken, and his blood and flesh were spilt onto the ground. Some even began wordlessly shedding tears as they watched humanity's best warrior being horribly destroyed like that. It was as if the time itself had frozen. People rendered utterly speechless by the overwhelming shock couldn't even hear their own breathing. It was then, a lone hunter jumped out from somewhere and blew away the beast. No, there were 2 of them. A black-haired man appeared without warning right next to the Caucasian hunter. The anchors saw the black soldiers filling up the streets in the blink of an eye and cried out until their voices turned hoarse. The viewers all around the world punched the air and cried out in elation once more as they watched the black soldiers completely cover up the streets of Seoul. Especially the Americans, their unified roars were so loud that their cities seemed to rock from the noise itself. Looking unconcerned in the slightest, the Sovereign of Frost took a step forward. It sucked its breath in lightly before spitting out horrifyingly cold air that spread out everywhere in an instant. And in just one moment, everything standing on the ground became frozen ice sculptures. Even the Shadow Army was no exception. How can this be? Jin Woo confirmed that his soldiers had all frozen up and his expression hardened gradually. The power of the sovereigns that rendered the soldiers useless in one stroke. He had experienced something like this before, when he was facing off against the Sovereign of White Flames, Baron, back in the Demon's Castle Instant Dungeon. If there was one glaring difference between then and now, that would be him having to face 3 enemies instead of 1. The soldiers trapped within the ice couldn't be freed even with his ability to store them back in his shadow. The Sovereign of Frost sounded confident of its victory after imprisoning the Shadow Army. However, Jin Woo's killing intent didn't waver for a second even under the current situation. The tip of the Kamish's wrath held in his right hand was pointed at the Sovereign of Frost. You will definitely die today. The war potential of the Shadow Army always had been supplementary to his own. It was too bad that he couldn't rely on his soldiers now, but even then, he wasn't thinking of letting that Sovereign of Frost leave here alive. After all, he had a score to settle with that beastard. Perhaps the ice elf felt the aching from the wound on its shoulder inflicted by Jin Woo the last time, since its expression crumpled unsightly rather quickly. The creature then raised its arms as if to lift something up, and suddenly, golems made out of ice rose up from the ground. At the same time, the queen of the insects whistled loudly. The corpses of humans lying strewn about all began standing up as well. Undead? No, those weren't undead at all. What moved the corpses were strange little parasites that had bored into the brains of the dead humans. Jin Woo sensed the minute level of magic energy emitted from the parasites wiggling around inside the heads, and he shifted his gaze over to the Queen of Insects. The queen had inseminated the eggs of a very special parasite within the corpses of all the humans the beast had murdered. Golems and parasites. Jinwoo stared at the enemy's army that couldn't be turned into shadow soldiers upon their deaths, and realized how much his opponents had been planning for this day. As the time slowed down, the pair of Kamish's wraths roared out in sheer anguish. In an instant, every spider-human leaping in the air was bisected. Jinwoo lightly kicked and leapt away from the punch of a golem pounding down on his original position and searched for his primary elimination target. That would be the Sovereign of Frost, of course. That beastard was currently shouting at its golems with an enraged face. However, it was impossible for these slow and lumbering things to catch up to Jinwoo's speed. He used ruler's authority to fling himself at the Sovereign of Frost. Like a bullet, he flew forward in a scarcely believable velocity. He closed the distance in an instant. The Sovereign of Frost was panicking. Jinwoo swung his short sword with great power. His aim was the skin on the beastard's face that resembled the bark of an aged tree. Unfortunately, just before the Kamish's wrath could split the creature's face in half, something really hard blocked the trajectory of the blade. The beast, the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs, responded to Jinwoo's attack with lightning-quick reflexes and blocked the short sword in time. The beast toothily grinned, its disgusting teeth full of blood and flesh now on full display. However, Jinwoo also replied with a smirk, the humans laughing. Even before the beast had the time to sense the ominous foreboding, Kamish's wrath was suddenly enveloped in the black aura. Slice. The beast's wrist that rightfully boasted incredible hardness was cleanly severed from its arm. It was then Jinwoo picked up on some powerful energy above him and he quickly looked up. The Queen of Insects had formed a giant fist out of magical energy and was in the midst of slamming it down. As he landed on the ground, Jinwoo activated the skill ruler's authority to shove away the queen's fist. However, the force behind that attack was much greater than he anticipated and he could only barely stop it. The Queen of Insects swatted Jinwoo as if it was a human swatting a fly out of the air, and slammed him into a building nearby. The impact force from that was so severe that another building across the road shook hard from the vibration. Jinwoo emerged out from the debris of the fallen building and keeled over to the floor to spit out a heavy gasp. He felt dizzy. Loud buzzing tinnitus assaulted his ears. His breathing quickened and his vision grew just a bit fuzzy. However, he had no time to stay here and catch his breath. As soon as he raised his head, he spotted thousands of ice arrows floating up dozens of meters in the air above his head, all of them being the handiwork of the Sovereign of Frost. Jinwoo stood back up and stopped breathing for a moment there, and almost right away, the ice arrows filling up the sky shot down accurately to his current position. Faster, faster. Jinwoo swung his short swords and deflected away the magic arrows raining down without any break or gap in between. He was so fast that several afterimages began overlapping on top of one another. However, just how long will you be able to withstand our combined attacks? The Sovereign of Frost continued to fire the arrows endlessly as a sly grin floated up on its lips. When this human beastard's movement slows down even for a second, it was then. Stab. The ice elf's quaking eyes looked down to confirm the short sword stabbing deeply into its chest. The liquid staining its hands was its own blood. When it raised its head to look, the insolent human was glaring right back at the Sovereign, having had enough leeway to throw one of his short swords even in the midst of deflecting all the ice arrows. I told you, didn't I? You won't be getting out of here alive. The Sovereign of Frost, thoroughly enraged while controlling its ice golems, the spider humans controlled by the Sovereign of Plagues, and finally, the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs that had regenerated its severed wrist. The latter moved its new wrist this way and that to test it out, before summoning out its own sword from the subspace. Just like Jinwoo had done, all of their movements were caught in one go within Jinwoo's vision. He grasped both Kamish's wraths tightly and calmly collected his breaths as his enemies rushed at him again. Accompanied by the noise of something solid splitting up, he was greeted from behind by a voice that sounded so much more brilliant to his ears today. My king, Baru. Even before he felt happy at his master looking back at him, all those little nicks and scrapes on Jinwoo's body entered Baru's vision first. They were caused by the insect woman when she smacked his liege into the building just now. A mere insect woman dared to lay her hands on his king. She dared to touch his king. Baru's anger reached a new height and he flew directly at the Queen of the Insects. The thunderous screech of Baru reverberating throughout the battlefield that used to be city streets rendered the Sovereign of Frost quite surprised. Such a thing shouldn't even happen. It took a closer look at Baru's power in the emergency mode for a second there, and spat out a gasp of shock next. This power didn't belong to some measly shadow soldier at all. Each and every single one of the soldiers with martial grade acting as the Shadow Sovereign's hands and feet could be considered as destruction personified. The Sovereign of Frost couldn't have imagined that it would see a martial-grade creature today and failed to hide its astonishment. In the meantime, Baru had arrived right before the Queen of Insects, the target for his unquenchable rage. "Shut up, you crazy wench." At the back, the Sovereign of Frost. From the front, the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs. Scary attacks from the two monsters possessing powers on another level rained down on him. Lennart Nierman was sure of it now. He was sure that there was no one else around here that could chase after the battle of those three with their bare eyes except himself. As long as the grievously wounded Thomas Andre remained lying on the ground while being treated by the healers surrounding him. Even then, he couldn't clearly chase after Jin Woo's movements with his eyes. Only sighs of admiration kept leaking out of his mouth. Hunter Seong Jin Woo was not being pushed back by an inch even though he was fighting against the beast that subdued the Special Authority rank tanker with brute strength, as well as a monster that froze up the vast ground with a single breath. And soon, Hunter Seong's shape simply melted into thin air, and only the series of unending metallic clangs reverberated around the battlefield. Thomas Andre couldn't win against his curiosity, roused up from all those suspicious explosive noises, and had to ask, "What is going on?" Lennart murmured with disbelieving voice, unable to tear his gaze away from Jin Woo. "It's as if I'm looking at the end of the world." Lennart spat out his genuine thoughts stewing in his head, not even bothering to dress it up in fancy words, and shook his head. Jin Woo heard Baru's scream and his head snapped in that direction. The former Ant King was being trampled under the Queen of Insects' foot and was putting up a desperate struggle to escape, but it was proving to be inadequate. At that moment, Jin Woo's eyes widened. Magical energy was leaving Baru's body and his existence was gradually thinning out. Could that be how the soldier attached to Thomas's shadow was erased, too? Jin Woo's expression hardened. He couldn't afford to lose Baru like this. That guy was one of his most precious soldiers and at the same time, the greatest fighting power within the Shadow Army. If Baru disappears and stops distracting the Queen of Insects, then this precarious balance will break down. This problem was also linked to his current battle as well. Jin Woo once more shook off the ice spear and the blade heading his way, and dashed towards the Queen of Insects. Since the Queen was far too focused on destroying the most powerful Shadow Soldier, it discovered Jin Woo's approach a little too late. Carrying a horrendous amount of magic energy, slammed into the insects wrapped around the Queen and blew them away. After its true visage was revealed once more, the Queen failed to disguise its fluster. It hurriedly spat out a green-colored liquid onto Jin Woo's face, but he simply activated Ruler's authority to deflect it away. As for the obvious poison remaining in the air, his passive buff easily neutralized it. The powers of the Sovereign of Plagues couldn't threaten Jin Woo in the slightest, and she was already within his attack radius. In that brief moment, a cold gleam flickered within his eyes. Just now, the Sovereign of Frost didn't die when its heart was pierced. There was a good chance it'd be the same story for this Sovereign of Plagues, too. In that case, since he had no idea where this creature's weakness was, he might as well continue to attack until he found it. Jin Woo got even closer until he was within touching distance to the Queen of Insects and gripped his short swords real tight. Violent slash. The blades rained down like buckshots on the Queen of Insects and turned the creature's entire body into a torn rag in an instant. However, the maggots wiggled and tangled with each other inside the monster's body to quickly restore its body. Regeneration. It wasn't a problem, though. If it possessed an ability to regenerate its body, then all he had to do was continuously pour out attacks that surpassed the rate of regeneration. That was all. Jin Woo chased after the Queen of Insects being knocked back and activated the skill, Violent Slash, over and over again. Pikamish's Wraths, carrying the jet black aura, fired out without a single break like a gun with infinite ammo. He activated Violent Slash with all his might, repeatedly, until he completely disintegrated every little bit of flesh that the Queen of Insects could potentially regenerate. And eventually, the ecstasy of level-up messages filling up his vision still felt great. Nice. However, when recalling the fact that he still had 2 more enemies aiming for his neck, he couldn't lounge around feeling happy for himself. Jin Woo urgently tried to turn around towards the direction of the intense murderous intent in order to defend himself. But his enemy was just a little bit quicker. While he was preoccupied with killing the Sovereign of Plagues, someone rushed towards him and extended its long hand. 5 separate strands of sharp wind blew in from behind his back. Jin Woo discovered 5 claws plunging past his chest. The beastly Sovereign had completely transformed itself into a werewolf and accurately stabbed Jin Woo's back with 5 blade-like claws on its right hand. All 5 had penetrated through his vital point. Jin Woo's body froze up at that moment. The pair of Kamish's Wraths fell from Jin Woo's hands. The Sovereign of Frost stood before him, Icy cold air spun and coagulated in the ice elf's hand and created an ice dagger. The ice dagger stabbed Jinwoo in his belly. Completely assured of its victory now, the ancient ice elf began moving that tree bark-like skin to form a contorted grin. The beastard leaned in closer to whisper in Jinwoo's ear. The Sovereign of Frost distanced itself from Jinwoo's ear and stared at his hardened expression before forming an insidious grin. The icy coldness spread out from the dagger stabbing into his belly and froze up Jinwoo's body. As the icicle reached up to his face, his eyes continued to emit flames of sheer anger. Even then, the Sovereign of Frost was smirking derisively. The ice elf yanked the dagger out and immediately stabbed it into Jinwoo's heart. The icy blade oozing whitish light easily shattered his rib bones and accurately penetrated his heart. The Sovereign of Frost confirmed that the human's heart had been destroyed and pulled the dagger out. Jinwoo powerlessly collapsed to the ground. His head clattered on the hard surface and he felt this crippling vertigo. At the same time, he sensed his two enemies getting further away from him. The skills information window opened up by itself and a small change occurred to one of the skills within the blinking passive column. Passive skills: LV, Max, Tenacity LV1, Master of Shortsword LV, Max. Passive skills: Evolution LV, Max, Tenacity LV1, Master of Shortsword LV, Max. Are you awake now? After hearing that familiar voice, Jinwoo quickly opened his eyes. He saw a white ceiling, and the smell of disinfectant stung his nose. Although the sensation of the hard bed kissing his back was different, he could easily tell just where he was. This was a hospital. But didn't he definitely feel the sensation of his heart shattering when the ice-cold dagger stabbed into his chest? Even then, and still alive, Jinwoo raised his upper torso up. He immediately spotted two men standing near his bed, making anxious faces as if they had been waiting for him to regain his consciousness for a long time. One of them was someone Jinwoo knew very well, Association President Wu Jinqiao. The Sovereigns. No, what happened to those monsters? How am I still alive? Wu Jinqiao shared confused looks with the fellow agent of the monitoring division next to him, took his sunglasses off before addressing Jinwoo. There are 3 things I must tell you. He pulled a chair close to the bed and settled down. The junior agent quickly stepped behind him. Firstly, I'm not the association president, but the chief of the monitoring division. Secondly, we are here to ask you about the animated stone statues. And finally, a powerful glare oozed out from Wu Jinqiao's scrutinizing eyes. How do you know about me? Have we met before, somewhere? Wait, you said something about animated stone statues. After we received the report from the survivors and arrived on site with the White Tiger Guild, it was already. No, hang on. That's not it. Jinwoo quickly cut Wu Jinqiao off and shook his head in dumbfoundedness. Several emotions, impossible to describe in words, rushed in. Could it be? Jinwoo raised his head and stared at the ceiling. He was thinking that it was an oddly familiar sight ever since he opened his eyes, but he really was back here. Makes sense why it's so familiar. He spent almost 2 weeks in this place, after all. This was the VIP patient room provided by the Hunters Association. He was back in the hospital room where he opened his eyes for the first time after barely managing to survive the dual dungeon incident. Thinking back to what Wu Jinqiao said just now, it didn't seem like the location wasn't the only thing here that was the same. But, how can such a thing even be possible? Jinwoo remained utterly confused and dazed, leading Wu Jinqiao to cautiously ask him, "Are you feeling alright? Can I be left alone to organize my thoughts? Please hurry up with measuring my magical energy so we can end this quickly." Status window. He wasn't surprised in the least by the message floating in the air, and took a look at the status window displaying his current level. Name: Xiang Jinwoo. Level: 146. Class: Shadow Sovereign. Title: Demon Hunter. HP: 93,300. MP: 155,720. Tiredness: 0. Strength: 324. Endurance: 320. Agility: 340. Intelligence: 340. Perception: 321. Reduction in physical damage: 65%. Reduction in magical damage: 44%. Passive skills: Tenacity LV1. Master of Shortsword LV. Max. Active skills: Quicksilver LV. Max. Intimidation LV. 2. Violence/LV. Max. Dagger Rush LV. Max. Stealth LV. Max. Ruler's Authority LV. Max. Active skills: Shadow Extraction LV. 2. Shadow Storage LV. 2. Sovereign's Territory LV. 2. Shadow Exchange LV. 2. My level's gone up a lot since the last time I took a look at it. Is it because of the experience points I earned after killing the Sovereign of Plagues? That wasn't all, either. Everything he had stored in his inventory until now was also waiting for him as they always had been. He even spotted the pair of Kamish's rats resting quietly on the very first column of the inventory and formed a hollow smile. He had somehow returned to the beginning with everything he had achieved so far. Well, the Shadow Soldiers aren't here anymore, but his army could be rebuilt in no time at all. Since he had retained all of his prior abilities and memories, he was confident of doing a better job this time around. However, just how did this happen? Why was this thing happening? Although he was given the second go at life here, all sorts of possibilities fleeted in and out of his head and he couldn't be happy about his current situation at all. Jinwoo carefully combed over his memories, wondering if he had overlooked something, before his head rose up. Should be here soon. As he expected, just like how he remembered it, his little sister pounced into the hospital room with excellent timing. Appa, after she lost almost all of her school friends at the hands of the orcs, there always had been a shadow cast on her expression even when she was smiling. But, right now, there was no hint of such darkness on her face. Jinwoo's heart softened from seeing her expression and he tightly hugged her. Oh Appa, what's going on? What's gotten into you? Did you hit your head? Eventually, her Appa ended the hug and grinned refreshingly. Seeing him behaving like this, all thoughts of anger dissipated from her mind and she could only tilt her head this way, and that with a puzzled look on her face. She couldn't put her finger on it, but her Appa seemed somewhat different from the normal. Now that she took a closer look, she kind of got the impression that her Appa had grown a lot taller since the last time she saw him a few days ago. A short while later, he lightly chased his little sister out and changed his clothes before stepping outside the hospital room himself. Appa, where are you going now? To the Hunters Association. Why there? To tell them I'm giving up being a hunter. Really? Jinwoo looked back at his little sister in her wide-open eyes. I know that you asked permission to leave from your school to come here, so you should go back now. Jin-Ah watched on with an expression gradually becoming even more confused as her Appa's back disappeared from view. The association employee confirmed the re-evaluation test results once more and continued to rub his eyes over and over again. It had been 2 years since Cha Hyun's appearance, hadn't it? The employee looked up at the 10th hunter to reach the unable to measure category in Korea, and his complexion paled greatly. Since Jinwoo's outward appearance looked so wretched like a pauper, the employee was dismissive about this young man. But to think, he turned out to be a genuine rank S hunter. The device we have right now can't measure your magic energy level. Seong Jinwoo Hunter Nim. I know, but before we do the retest, I'd like to speak to the association president first. Will that be alright with you? Why you mean, the association president? Yes, Jinwoo was already familiar with the re-evaluation procedures. I shall escort you to the office of the association president. I know where it is already. Thanks for the offer, but it's okay. Jinwoo bade a short goodbye and walked straight to the elevator. The employee looked at his departing back with an expression of utter loss. How can an outsider know where the president's office is? Too bad for the employee. The elevator stopped on the correct floor where the association president's office was. Jinwoo stepped out of the elevator and immediately discovered a familiar face walking past him in order to enter the lift. He turned around to address this man. Excuse me. The man pressed the door open button to stop the elevator when Jinwoo turned to look at him. Are you talking to me? You haven't disclosed the fact that you possess the stealth skill. You're an upper rank hunter, but your name wasn't on the list of those under the association's strict management. The hunter affiliated with the monitoring division, Kong T6 expression hardened instantly. But how? Someone will ask you to avenge his daughter soon. I don't care what happens to the criminals. However, if the innocent hunters get hurt in that incident, you will die by my hands. Understand? Jinwoo emitted just a little bit of his killing intent, causing Kong T6 to flinch and reach into his waist. However, it wasn't there. Kong T6 continued to rummage around his waist for a while before finally realizing that his knife had disappeared. You looking for this? Jinwoo casually tossed a knife up and down before handing it back to him. You get only one warning. Knowing that this young man could easily dissect him into tiny little pieces if he wanted to, Kong T6 slowly nodded his head while pocketing the knife. And then, he asked a question as Jinwoo turned around to leave. Look here, man. Just who are you? Have we ever met before? Jinwoo didn't bother to reply and quietly continued to make his way to the association president's office. Jinwoo's steps came to a halt. Go Gun Huey, still alive, was sitting behind his desk going through his documents right now. Jin Woo stood by the doorway and stared at the association president with eyes filled with nostalgia. Meanwhile, Go Gun Huey chuckled good-naturedly. Although you opened my door with so much confidence, it seems that you're a bit lacking in spirit there. It's fine for you to come inside, Seong Jin Woo Hunter Nim. Go Gun Huey studied the young man before him and spoke up first. Seeing that you came to see me right away after your re-evaluation test, may I assume that you know about the normal procedures? Yes, basically. In that case, let me not beat around the bush and be direct with you. Before that, I'd like to make a deal with you first, Association President. A deal. Initially, Go Gun Huey felt rather flustered by this young man, who was acting as if he knew he'd be a rank S hunter from the beginning. However, being spunky was an excellent weapon wielded by the young, was it not? What is it that you want from us, Hunter Nim? Please, change the regulations so that even the summoned creatures called out by the hunters are counted as raid team members. You want me to change the regulation? That's a rather difficult request, isn't it? I expect an attractive offer from you, powerful enough to sway my mind. Jin Woo took his time before making his reply. I will kill all the ants on Jeju Island. Right now, replenishing his army took precedence over everything. And Jeju Island was practically crawling with the finest quality monsters ready to be turned into shadow soldiers. As long as this offer was accepted, not only would he get to solve the issue of filling up the ranks of the shadow army, he would also be spared from the headache of not having usable members in the future as well. Before he woke his mother up with the divine water of life, he wanted to finish this part of the job first. However, what Jin Woo said came across as a desire to kill himself to Go Gun Huey's ears. Don't say something that nonsensical, young man. Such a reaction was fully expected. Jin Woo didn't lose his cool and calmly released all of the magical energy resting within himself for a very brief moment. A bottomless and vast power defying all attempts to estimate its true scope spread out from Jin Woo's body. The truly strong could recognize a fellow strong being. The association president, often called the sky above the sky, shook his head in utter disbelief. How? Just how? What on earth is this? He powerfully shuddered. Never before in his entire life had he felt this amount of magic energy emitted from another human being. A special authority rank hunter. No, this power had far surpassed their levels. The association president simply couldn't bring his slack jaw to a close. I can take care of all the ants on Jeju Island. Didn't Go Gun Huey once say that doing so was his life's wish? The older man was about to chide Jin Woo for being immature and reckless, but after seeing the resolute expression on Jin Woo's face, his own expression quickly changed as well. Are you being serious? Jin Woo nodded his head. This is something only I can do. Please, leave it to me. Jin Woo took a long sweeping look at the corpses of ants strewn about from one end of the land all the way to the other side. And he looked below his feet where Baru, no, the Ant King's corpse was resting quietly. It hadn't been that long since he had seen his loyal soldier, but Jin Woo yearned to hear Baru's voice busily calling out to his king again. So, he quickly shouted out towards the ants, "Rise up." When he did, shadow soldiers rose up from the shadows of every single ant he could see. Baru was among them, too. Oh, my king. Jin Woo took in the sight of several thousand ants kneeling all around him and slowly nodded his head. A brand new army was here. The new Shadow Army, starting from the most perfect state imaginable, swore their loyalty to their new master. However, after talking to his new soldiers, he became sure of it. Let's stop this. Even though a new Shadow Army had been created, there was this gaping hole in his heart that didn't want to fill back up. Baru looked up with worry, but Jin Woo knew that even that expression and emotion were all a lie. And that was why his heart ached even more so as he looked at his soldiers. Thick veins popped up in his throat as he loudly yelled out, "I know all of this is just an illusion. Why don't you stop this charade and reveal yourself?" This illusion was incredibly lifelike. Because of that, there had been some moments that he dearly wished for this thing to be his true reality. However, there was no hiding the emptiness in his heart that seemed to grow larger and larger the longer he spent inside this illusion. That was why. Hurry up. Jin Woo loudly roared into the empty sky above, before finally realizing that a change had taken place. That time had frozen still. The gazes of every single ant soldier and their raised heads were directed towards him. For a moment there, he felt goosebumps break out on his skin from receiving all those mechanical stares. It was then, below his feet, the sovereign's territory, a jet black shadow rapidly spread out. Everything touched by that shadow all vanished without exception. Baru, the soldiers, corpses, the ground, the sea, and finally, even the sky itself. Soon, the entire world became submerged in shadow. No, everything simply transformed into darkness instead. Only then did a weighty, heavy voice come at him from a place within this darkness. Jin Woo searched for the voice coming from an unknown direction and made his reply. Are you telling me to stay trapped within this illusion you have created? I created this world. Jin Woo was about to reply with nonsense, but sensed something approach him. It was his rear. He quickly spun around. Sure enough, someone was walking closer from within the impenetrable darkness. This figure was kitted out in this exquisite black armor that no other shadow soldier could even hope to match. And he also emitted an utterly shocking amount of pressure that no other living being Jin Woo ever met possessed. He found it hard to open his mouth when he came face to face with this figure. Jin Woo finally realized then. He finally realized that this dark world he was standing in had been gently and invitingly embracing him all this time. So, this is the eternal rest, is it? Death? If so, the man who claimed this world on the other side of consciousness as his territory had to be. The man in the black armor slowly walked closer to Jin Woo. You've been watching me. Eventually, the man stood right before Jin Woo and stared with those black eyes that seemed to suck everything in. Every word he spoke reverberated weightily within Jin Woo's soul. All those memories of him struggling hard to survive despite his weakness fleeted in and out of his mind like a revolving lantern, and made his heart palpitate faster. The figure reached down and grabbed Jin Woo's hand and placed it on his own armored chest. That's when Jin Woo's eyes widened in shock. He could definitely feel it beyond the thick metal armor plate. How could he not recognize it? How could he not recognize the vigorous pounding of the heart that he always got to hear by concentrating just a little bit harder? How could he not recognize the sounds of his second heart, the one where he had no clue where it was beating from? It was the black heart. The black heart was powerfully beating within this armored figure's chest. The figure quietly finished his words. He looked to his right. Suddenly, a massive tree the size of several dozen skyscrapers bound together rose up to pierce the heavens above. He looked to the other side next. When his head turned to the left, a maglev train suddenly emerged from the distant darkness and shot past his position in the blink of an eye. These two appeared out of nowhere simply because Jin Woo wished to see them. Although this power to create and change worlds was limited to the Shadow Sovereign's territory, Jin Woo still ended up letting out a sigh of admiration. This omnipotent power had become his now. Jin Woo briefly closed his eyes before opening them up, and that prompted a field of flowers to bloom before his feet and spread out in all directions. It was the same type of flower as the one the Shadow Sovereign created by changing the tree. Was this the result of the excellent perception, or because he was connected to the Shadow Sovereign? Jin Woo could sense the Sovereign feeling satisfied while looking at the field of flowers. The Sovereign shifted his gaze over to his human counterpart. The Shadow Sovereign officially introduced himself. Awesome, dignified presence oozed out from the Sovereign. However, Jin Woo didn't feel scared even though true death capable of reducing any living being into a shuddering mess was right before him. This being was him. He felt his emotions soar higher after meeting another version of himself. Finally, he could ask that one question stuck in his head, not wanting to let him go ever since the system became a part of his life. Why was I chosen? Why did the system choose him as the player? Was it because he managed to survive the dual dungeon that day? No, it couldn't have been. He believed that there had to be another reason. And this was the moment that his question might get an answer. The Shadow Sovereign slowly extended his hand towards Jin Woo's forehead. The moment that forefinger touched him, the entire world changed. The eyes and the ears of the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs confirmed the death of his prey. It could not sense any hint of life from the subject at all. They managed to succeed in stopping one of the most powerful kings from turning into an unwelcome variable in their plan. Hunter Seong's presence vanished just now. Can't you tell me what's going on? Thomas Andre, his wounds not even half healed yet, threw out a question. Lennart forced his unwilling lips to part. It was then. The two sovereigns walking leisurely over in Lennart's direction simultaneously looked behind them. Something impossible happened just then. From the body of the human whose heart was confirmed to be destroyed, they could hear vigorous, pounding heartbeats. But how? How could such a thing be possible? The two sovereigns exchanged disbelieving gazes with each other. And then, the absolute worst possibility entered their heads next. They had been overlooking this crucial fact until now. These two thought that, by killing the human host, they would also get to extinguish the Shadow Sovereign within, too. Just like how they themselves would die after taking over their hosts. However, their opponent this time was the King of the Dead. There was no guarantee that death, supposed to treat everyone equally regardless of who, would be applied to him in the same manner. The end of one could also become the beginning for someone else. They had to stop this at all costs. They had to stop the descent of the true king via this fake death. Their expression turned utterly pale before they reacted almost instinctively. Two sovereigns instantly closed the distance to Jinwoo and reached out with their long claws and ice spear. In order to completely destroy the body that had acted as the tool of the king's descent, they poured in their entire magical energy into their weapons. Unfortunately, a figure hidden in stealth lightly landed on the ground before them, and his short swords blocked the claws and the ice spear quite ably. The Shadow Sovereign hadn't regained his consciousness yet. In that case, who could this being be? The two sovereigns couldn't hide their shock and fluster after their desperate attacks were defended against. The owner of the short swords undid his stealth and finally revealed himself. It was a figure cloaked in a hood. A pair of eyes gleaming in pure golden light were glaring at the sovereigns from below the hood. From here on, none shall touch this child. In another world, light and darkness existed in an age where nothing else yet existed. The Absolute Being split the light and created the emissaries of God. As for the darkness, it was split to create 8 sovereigns. Heeding the command issued during their birth, the sovereigns born to destroy worlds and the emissaries born to maintain the worlds began killing each other's soldiers over and over again. At the end of the lengthy war, fatigued by the constant and unending war, the most bright fragment of the brilliant light asked the Absolute Being, "O, our absolute ruler, why does thee not aid thy most faithful subjects fighting in thy honor? Why does thee ignore thy subjects' pain? Doth thee really not hear the screams of countless soldiers dying for thy honor? Aid us, lend us the strength to extinguish our opponents. We shall cut off their heads and offer them as the tribute to thy glory." However, the Absolute Being didn't reply back to the fragment. It was at that moment the fragments came to a realization, and that would be the truth of the battle between themselves and the sovereigns being nothing more than a form of entertainment to the Absolute Being, and that their ruler didn't wish for the battles to end. Now knowing that the war would never end as long as the Absolute Being continued to exist, the fragments fell into despair. The despair they felt transformed into rage, and rage soon morphed into hatred. To end this meaningless war, they unsheathed their blades. It was the start of the rebellion. Jinwoo witnessed the endless march of the soldiers spanning the cosmos itself. Oh my God! However, a group of soldiers suddenly appeared from the distance and blocked the march. The Shadow Sovereign next to Jinwoo pointed at the fragment of the brilliant light with 6 wings, standing in front of the blocking group. He was the sole emissary of God who stood up against the rebellion of the other emissaries. In the end, though, the pitiful number of soldiers he led powerlessly fell before the united armies of the emissaries. The fragment of the brilliant light never lost his absolute loyalty until the end. He died watching his brave subordinates get swept away by their enemies. He thought that this was the end. But when he reopened his eyes within the embrace of the darkness, he came to realize that the Absolute Being had hidden a certain power inside of him. For that eventuality when everything went wrong, the Absolute Being had hidden a truly fiendish power capable of ending everything inside its most loyal slave. And so, floating within this endless abyss of darkness, the Sovereign of Death had finally opened his eyes towards his power. He tore off the remaining traces of his wings, all burnt away from the battle, and crafted brand new armor out of the surrounding darkness. Souls sleeping within this abyss heard the call and swore eternal allegiance to their new king. He led his brand new army and made his return. But when he finally came back, everything was already over. The remaining fragments of brilliant light had killed the Absolute Being and called themselves the new gods, thus assuming the position of the rulers. And using various tools containing the might of the Absolute Being, they hunted down the sovereigns. When the King of Giants, the sovereign of the beginning, Rigia, was captured, the balance between the two sides collapsed and the remaining sovereigns realized the severity of the situation. It was at that moment that the Shadow Sovereign extended his hands to them. To combat their common enemy, every existing sovereign combined their forces. And in this manner, the war between 7 rulers and 9 sovereigns continued on, forever. The longer this war continued on, however, the greater the army of the Shadow Sovereign grew. Time was on his side. Thanks to his brilliant achievements, it seemed as if the victors of this long war would be the sovereigns. However, it wasn't only the rulers fearing the might of the Shadow Army that had grown, unbeknownst to all, to equal the army of destruction led by the King of Berserk Dragons. 2 sovereigns feared the Shadow Sovereign. The 2 of them were the Sovereign of White Flames and the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs. They aimed for the back of the former emissary just as the war was drawing to a close. It was at this point that Jinwoo got to witness again the scenes he saw within the save data back in the dual dungeon. The armies of demons and beasts joined hands with the armies of the rulers and pounced on the Shadow Sovereign and his army, and that resulted in him being driven to near annihilation. But then, the king of beasts, the sovereign of beastly fangs, ran away to save its own life, while forsaking its own soldiers. Meanwhile, the king of demons, the sovereign of white flames, Baron, had to pay the ultimate price. The words Jinwoo couldn't understand. When he heard the words of the dying Baron, his eyes shook around really hard back then. And then, above his head, 4 angels with 6 wings slowly descended from the sky. That was where the video playback of the data Jinwoo watched came to an end. The 4 rulers soon surrounded the Shadow Sovereign, who no longer possessed enough strength to command his own shadow army. The Sovereign must have figured out what the inevitable result of this fight would be and discarded his sword to the ground. But if those rulers had killed the Shadow Sovereign back then, how could the existence of this Shadow Sovereign even be explained? Jinwoo swallowed his dry saliva and paid even closer attention to what could possibly be the end of the Shadow Sovereign. But then, the rulers began kneeling before the Shadow Sovereign one by one. And a short while later, the 6-winged angel kneeling in front raised his voice. The rulers were asking for forgiveness from the Shadow Sovereign. They occupied an overwhelmingly advantageous position. As long as they willed it, they could have sent the Shadow Sovereign back to the empty void, yet they wished to make up with him instead. This was their own way of showing their respect towards a comrade, born together at the same time, as well as the greatest warrior who once stood at the forefront with his army of brilliant light in the war against the powers of the sovereigns. Although the Shadow Sovereign was never their leader, his comrades nevertheless respected him greatly, and that was why they ignored the command from their leader, the brightest fragment of brilliant light, to get rid of the sovereign and instead chose to kneel before him. The enraged voice of the Shadow Sovereign resounded throughout the land next. The sovereign reached down and grabbed the collar of the ruler asking for forgiveness and yanked him up by force. The rulers maintained a courteous attitude, even towards the enraged Shadow Sovereign. Although they had to fight against him because of the differing ideals, they still hadn't forgotten about their admiration towards him in their hearts, and consequently, they paid their utmost respect. The number of such soldiers utterly dominated the entire sky. And when all of them lowered their heads, the Shadow Sovereign stopped silently watching them and turned around to leave. The Sovereign of Death left the scene just like that, and afterwards, he completely vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, the combined forces of the Sovereigns, now that their own armies had been greatly depleted by the internal conflict of the 3 sovereigns, met with a resounding defeat at the hands of the rulers. The defeated remnants escaped to the crack between dimensions with their remaining forces. When the Shadow Sovereign and the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs ran into each other, others became extremely tense that another violent clash might take place. But due to the intervention from the Dragon Emperor, the feared event didn't come to pass. The Dragon Emperor then accepted the Shadow Sovereign back to their fold once more with open arms. So, this guy is the king of Berserk Dragons, the Sovereign of Destruction. The insane level of power oozing out from nothing more than just a glare even made Jinwoo's teeth clatter. Having evacuated to the crack between dimensions, the sovereigns avoided the ruler's detection and searched for a new world where they would nurture their army again. Countless galaxies and planets flew past Jinwoo's eyes, and eventually, the footage came to a stop right before a certain planet. Through their concerted efforts over a long period of time, the sovereigns succeeded in tunneling a portal from the crack between dimensions to Earth that existed in another dimension. And thanks to the entrance of unprecedented enemies, mankind couldn't avoid the fate of being annihilated. Jinwoo's expression hardened as he watched the cities get reduced to smoldering rubble, as first seen inside the Demon's Castle Instant Dungeon. Is this what will happen in the future? Jinwoo's eyes quaked powerfully from that unexpected answer. But his shock could linger around only for a short while, because the Shadow Sovereign continued on with his explanation. If the purpose of the sovereigns was to destroy, then the role of the rulers was to maintain the worlds. Naturally, the rulers grew angry at the fact that the thugs of the Chaos world they failed to eradicate the last time managed to bring down yet another world. In order to right the wrong, they resorted to activating a certain tool of God that they themselves had prohibited from use. The tool of God was called Chalice of Rebirth, an item they made sure to steal first as their top priority from God's storage, just before they started their rebellion. It was an incredible item that could reverse time by around 10 Earth years. 10 years. Jinwoo's eyes shot wide open. Could this be pure coincidence that the number of years matched the time when gates began generating out of thin air, and hunters appeared to stop them? The rulers did their best to rescue other worlds, but Earth was simply too fragile to host the battles between themselves and the sovereigns. This planet with no magical energy couldn't endure against the mass-scale battles. Didn't matter who won in the end between the rulers or the sovereigns, the result waiting for this planet remained the same. After going through several cycles of war and the destruction of the planet, the rulers came to a drastic decision. If saving everyone was impossible, then make sure that some would still survive and continue the life on this planet. If so, does that mean? Only then did Jinwoo finally realize it. He realized the reason why these rulers stayed behind the scenes and quietly let the process take place without getting in touch with humanity, even if they knew that there was a calamity coming. Humans capable of surviving in the changed world are. If humanity learned that everyone in the world would die soon with the sole exception of the small number of people referred to as hunters, would the human societies be able to function properly ever again? While the rulers busily tried to fix their mistakes several times, the sovereigns also began modifying their plan continuously as well, until the tool of God couldn't be used anymore. Hold up, are you telling me that there's a limit to this chalice of rebirth? There was a hint of this tangible bitterness in his voice, and that prompted Jinwoo to turn his head towards the Shadow Sovereign before he had time to even notice it. I'm asking you because it was brought up first, but how can creations kill the creator? Even if machines were created for the sake of humanity's convenience, they could still harm humans depending on how they were utilized. It was a similar sort of reason as to why humans feared artificial intelligence they themselves had created. Jinwoo nodded his head. Soon, the figures of several familiar sovereigns appeared around Jinwoo and the Shadow Sovereign, and that would be to copy the method of the rulers that lent the portions of their powers to various humans and had them kill monsters in order to spread magic energy throughout the planet. Sovereigns would also borrow the bodies of human hosts to descend on the world and bring their armies far earlier than what the rulers had been expecting, to devour the rulers' armies coming to aid humanity in one go. For a sovereign possessing incredible power to cross over into this world, it needed a host body. Sovereigns searched for and found suitable hosts for themselves one by one. However, only the two, the Sovereign of Destruction and the Shadow Sovereign, the possessors of two indescribably enormous powers, couldn't find human hosts with a physique that could handle their powers. The Architect. This wizard, referred to as the Architect by the Sovereigns, promised to aid the Shadow Sovereign's descent to this world for the price of turning him into a true immortal. Since he was already somewhat interested in the ongoings of the human world, the Shadow Sovereign agreed to this offer. Unfortunately, no human alive could handle the power of death. Obviously, the Architect became rather anxious as time ticked by. While the Architect was sweating buckets trying to locate suitable candidates, the Shadow Sovereign actually went ahead and found himself a potential host first. Jinwoo raised his head, as if there were hundreds of monitors displaying all sorts of varied and colorful images of him. His past self doing various things appeared in all directions. He had been working as a hunter for 4 years. Jinwoo was ranked E, not only that, at the bottom of the lowest rank, too. Yet, despite experiencing the life-threatening dangers of dungeons every day, he didn't stop entering them. It was all for the sake of his mother and his little sister. He sacrificed himself for his family and desperately struggled on. The records of the past 4 years were all preserved in their entirety within the Shadow Sovereign's memories. The Shadow Sovereign was now pointing at Jinwoo, and seeing that unwavering finger, he felt his heart race faster and faster. The Sovereign did say it before, didn't he? I am the record of your bitter struggle. I am the evidence of your resistance. I am the reward of your pain. Those words weren't describing Jinwoo's life after he had become a player. No, it was about his life before he got to enjoy the benefit of the system. Every one of those words rang weightily within his chest once more. The dual dungeon, the test of his survival, and then the player. All of these were part of the plan of the Architect to create a suitable vessel for the Shadow Sovereign. What humans enjoyed playing and were also good at, he said. Jinwoo knew right away what that thing was as soon as he heard the Sovereign. It was none other than video games. Here was the reason why the system designed to manage the player possessed such a similar layout to a video game. And Jinwoo was the lone successful case among all the test subjects. But then, you betrayed the Architect, didn't you? Jinwoo recalled the sight of the angel statue jumping up and down in fury while busily crying out that the other sovereigns had been deceived back inside the second dual dungeon. The puzzling thing was, why did the Shadow Sovereign deceive the one he was in contract with, and choose Jinwoo instead? He simply had to ask for clarification here. But why? For the first time ever, the Shadow Sovereign hesitated. He looked to be agonizing over something, and Jinwoo didn't press him for an immediate answer. Eventually, the Sovereign opened his mouth again. Compared to how lengthy his deliberation was, that answer was way too simple. Strangely enough, Jinwoo couldn't hold back his chuckle, though. Rather than erasing Jinwoo's ego and taking over his body, the Shadow Sovereign had chosen to assimilate with him instead. Meaning, he chose to become a part of him. and the end result was, the Shadow Sovereign possessed the exact same face as him. I am you. That was the undeniable truth, with not an ounce of falsehood within. The Shadow Sovereign lowered his left hand, raised the right one instead. In an instant, all those faces disappeared, only to be replaced by a humongous dragon flying in from the darkened sky high above. And then, an army entirely consisting of countless dragons following after it to incinerate every city they could find. Jinwoo stared at the army of destruction led by the Dragon Emperor with a hardened face before making his reply. No, he asked a question instead. Why did you run away to another world with the other sovereigns when you had no desire to fight against the rulers? The Shadow Sovereign was a ruler and at the same time, a sovereign, and he couldn't find the place he could call home with either group. That was why he chose to wander in other worlds he was not originally a part of, hoping to find his place. Hearing the sovereign's answer, Jinwoo finally made his decision. My answer is the same. An imperceptible smile had already floated up on the sovereign's face even before Jinwoo made his reply. This is not where I belong. The Shadow Sovereign nodded, saying, does this mean I won't ever get to see you again? Despite saying those words, there was the look of a relieved man on the sovereign's face. Finally, the time of rest had come after an eternity of waiting. Jinwoo watched the sovereign genuinely feeling happy for himself and bade his last goodbye. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. For a brief moment there, a look of wistful longing brushed past the sovereign's expression before disappearing altogether. Jinwoo stopped him there. I know, because I am you. A smile floated up on the Shadow Sovereign's face as the time of departure drew near. After a long journey, he had reached a place he could rest now. The sovereign addressed Jinwoo. He took a step back and wordlessly stared at Jinwoo, nodding his head. 2 words that would allow him to be reborn as the perfect Shadow Sovereign left his lips in a low, hushed voice. Rise up. The system's familiar female voice rang in his head the moment Jinwoo uttered rise up. Jinwoo was now bestowed with the true power of the Shadow Sovereign, which meant that the system was now rendered irrelevant to him. So, it began deleting itself. He felt as if he was saying goodbye to a nanny that looked after him since his childhood. Goodbye, my king. I pray that you find the peaceful rest you dearly wished for so long in the land of eternal sleep. Finally, even the system message signifying farewell popped up. 2 icons of yes and no blinked in the empty air. Jinwoo shifted his gaze, one last time, to the Shadow Sovereign. Even until the end, the former angel hadn't lost that content smile of his, because that would be the lasting image engraved in his heart, after all. That was why Jinwoo also smiled back. With a smile, he issued his final input to the system. Yes. A powerful wind pressure being generated at the same time with an explosion of light forced back the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs and the Sovereign of Frost. The former regained its posture first, its brows quivering. The body of the robe-wearing enemy was now burning in golden flames. That light was the symbol of the rulers. This Beastard was, without a doubt, a human that borrowed their powers. However, why were the rulers aiding one of the most powerful sovereigns out there, the Shadow Sovereign? The Sovereign of Frost cried out. The man wearing the robe didn't even bother to reply. No, instead of an answer, he simply brought up both of his short swords near his chin, clearly getting into a stance to fight. That was as good a sign as any of his intent. The Sovereign of Frost's expression hardened after confirming this man's decision once more. Its current opponent had borrowed the powers of the rulers and activated spiritual body manifestation. But a human's body couldn't withstand a god's power. Unlike with the sovereigns who had completely taken over the host's body and ego, the one borrowing the ruler's power would soon crumble into dust and disappear. Even then, he'll risk dying just to aid in the Shadow Sovereign's revival. Just what are the ruler Beastards scheming now? The Sovereign of Frost looked at the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs. They exchanged suspicious gazes. There was no time. Instantly, the 2 sovereigns split left and right to approach the robe-wearing man from both sides, before raining down a ceaseless barrage of attacks. The claws of a beast and the spear made of ice tried to tear into the robe-wearing man countless times, but as if he was well versed in combat, he easily countered and repelled all incoming attacks with expert movements. He would let the ice spear slip past him or block against the claws, but never forgot to throw out his counterattacks every now and then, as well. This was the action of a warrior that survived a nonsensical number of battlefields throughout his life. A truly troublesome opponent, in other words. An enemy possessing great strength and technique disregarded his own life to block the advance of the 2 sovereigns. The robe-wearing man blocked the weapons that carried incredible amounts of magical energy belonging to 2 sovereigns, and then shoved them away once more. The sovereigns landed some distance away, correctly judging that it would be quite difficult to get a desirable result in time. At this rate, it was then The Sovereign of Beastly Fangs suddenly reverted from its werewolf appearance back to its human form and spoke up. As it turned around to leave, the Sovereign of Frost hurriedly cried out to stop its comrade. The Sovereign of Beastly Fangs shook its head. It possessed sensory perception far exceeding the norm, and after picking up on the subtly changing atmosphere, its body shuddered ever so slightly. The gaze of the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs went up to the sky before shifting back to the Sovereign of Frost. Veins bulged on the neck of the clearly agitated ancient ice elf. Too bad. The Sovereign of Beastly Fangs remained rather collected in its reply. The Sovereign of Beastly Fangs was triggered by those words, and it angrily grabbed the collars of the ancient ice elf. Back then, the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs got to witness the depths of the Shadow Sovereign's powers when he faced off and survived against 6 huge armies consisting of the Beast Army, Demonic Army belonging to the White Flames, and lastly, the armies of the 4 rulers. Such a monster was about to show up here, so who cared about one's dignity in such a situation? It was fine if others ridiculed the Sovereign for hiding behind the Dragon Emperor. It'd do anything if it meant surviving until the end. With that departing words, the beast quickly stepped into the gate. The Sovereign of Frost clicked its tongue unhappily as it watched the gate gradually shrink before completely disappearing from the view. How could a fool that runs away in fear, even when there was a nearly dead prey right before its eyes, be deserving of the title of the Chaos World's best hunter? The Sovereign of Frost's thoughts remained the same as before. The Shadow Sovereign had to die, no matter what. And the prey was as good as tiptoeing on the precipice's edge. Nothing would change just because a hindrance suddenly showed up. Indeed, there was no reason to borrow the hand of a coward. Deciding such, the Sovereign of Frost activated its own spiritual body manifestation. Although its stamina would greatly be consumed by maintaining this form, as this wasn't the world it originally belonged to, there was a need to get the result as soon as possible before the Shadow Sovereign really made his appearance. The Sovereign of Frost transformed into a gigantic ice storm that instantly covered up the land. The violently thrashing blizzard slammed into everywhere. After morphing into an actual storm, the Sovereign of Frost coldly glared at the robe-wearing man below and roared out like a thunderclap. Tens of thousands of ice spears created out of crystallized mana in the air began raining down like falling snow. Each spear carried enough power to kill a person in one shot. That was how extremely terrifying this attack was. Cars still remaining in the roads were swept away like worthless toys, and buildings were torn apart by the blade-like winds. However, the robe-wearing man didn't even budge from his spot and protected Jinwoo behind him with all his being. Countless wounds began appearing on the man facing off against the endless barrage of ice spear blizzard. The facial expression of the ice elf crumpled unsightly. A measly human simply borrowing the powers of a higher being through sheer luck dares to form such an insolent face at me. The Sovereign of Frost tilted its shoulder and raised up its right arm up very high. In an instant, cold air gathered around the arm and transformed into a gigantic ice block. Now, let's see if you can withstand this. The Sovereign of Frost was planning to not only crush the man, but the vessel of the Shadow Sovereign lying behind him, too. It roused up its entire magical energy to slam down the block of ice. The man watched the shadow of the falling ice block grow ever larger and raised both of his frozen arms above. Even if his arms shattered, even if his body was crushed, he must protect Jinwoo. He dragged out every ounce of power granted to him by the ruler, and his body glowed in the most brilliant golden radiance. And finally, there was a collision. Strangely enough, although there was a collision, he didn't feel any impact force from it at all. What is? The man opened his closed eyes and discovered someone else standing before him. This figure was kitted out in jet black armor. And then, there was the blood-red mane extending from the top of its helm all the way down to its back. It was none other than the faithful servant of the Shadow Sovereign, Ygritte. The Sovereign of Frost had to doubt its own eyes after that attack was perfectly defended against. If the martial-grade Shadow Soldier made his appearance, then that could only mean the ancient ice elf flinched nastily in surprise and hurriedly shifted its gaze to the spot behind the robe-wearing man. Sure enough, the unconscious man who should have been lying there could no longer be found anymore. Finally, the Sovereign of Frost understood what the Sovereign of Beastly Fangs had said before running away. Ygritte turned around and politely knelt down and lowered his head. Baru, having appeared alongside Ygritte, screeched out loudly as if to announce the return of his master, and quickly knelt down while facing the same direction. And between the two, Jinwoo calmly walked out. He took a sweeping look around the messily destroyed surroundings and threw a question at the Sovereign of Frost. Did the beast run away? Only after facing off against the true Shadow Sovereign did the ancient ice elf realize the reason why the King of Beasts made its hasty, scared escape earlier. Even though it was the sovereign of all things existing within the cold, it was still trembling pitifully before the Lord of Death standing before it. Jinwoo continued on. I didn't permit it. Jinwoo didn't even give the ancient ice elf enough time to get flustered and simply closed his eyes. He rapidly expanded his sensory perception to his surroundings in search of the unique magic energy signature belonging to the sovereign of beastly fangs. The range of his perception exceeded past the border of South Korea in an instant and enveloped the whole planet. He was deeply confident that, as long as the sovereign of beastly fangs didn't escape to the gap between dimensions and remained hidden somewhere on Earth, he'd located that beastard no problem. And his confidence was not proven to be baseless. Jinwoo smiled refreshingly and opened his eyes after discovering the presence of the sovereign of beastly fangs. Found you. While Jinwoo had his eyes closed to focus all of his attention on searching for the escaped beast, the sovereign of frost had intuitively sensed it. It was an opening left by the Shadow Sovereign. Such an opportunity would not come around a second time. Even if there was a huge gap in individual strength, how dare he take his eyes off his enemy? Avoiding death would be impossible if this chance was left ungrasped. It was facing unavoidable death right now. In order to struggle free from the shadow of death taking large strides towards itself, the Sovereign of Frost decided to bet everything on one final move. I must end everything with this one hit. Its right arm slipped behind its back and mana began gathering there in a large lump. It then proceeded to create the most powerful spear of ice it had ever created. Every ounce of energy dragged up by the desperation it felt would be contained within this attack. A terrifying amount of magical energy was being forcibly concentrated on the ice spear. The power gathered was so great that the ground beneath the sovereign wielding the spear froze up in pure white while issuing cracking noises. Just before one would be tempted to wonder whether the sovereign's right arm grasping the spear had expanded far too much or not, the spear was fired out with the velocity of a bullet and tore straight through the air. Moments before the spear aiming at his forehead could penetrate into his face, Jinwoo opened his eyes. Found you. Simultaneously, the time flow of the surroundings came to a standstill as if the pause button had been pressed on the playback. No, actually, the time had slowed down to such an extent that it almost looked as if it had come to a standstill. The ice spear's shaft spinning at a scarcely believable speed was definitely getting closer, albeit only an inch at a time. To stop the weapon's advance, Jinwoo used one of his powers, Ruler's Authority. This was one of the Shadow Sovereign's powers, although he trained on using it proficiently while thinking that it was merely a skill. The moment he activated Ruler's Authority, he got to see the mana dispersed throughout the surroundings suddenly rush in and wrap about the ice spear. Once caught in the magical energy, the weapon lost all forward momentum and stopped in its tracks. He got to see for the first time how the skill Ruler's Authority worked, and he couldn't help but softly sigh in admiration. Ah, so it was not an invisible hand or some such. No, it was more like invisible mana. Simply put, mana moved according to the will of the skill's activator. Jinwoo's eyes could capture the movement of mana so clearly now, when it was impossible to do so in the past. The Sovereign of Frost shivered from shock after witnessing the true power of the Shadow Sovereign, formerly the greatest fragment of the brilliant light, as well as one of the most powerful kings in existence. The wall, the completely insurmountable wall. He could sense that creature shivering even at a distance away. He still had a score to settle with that thing. Jinwoo recalled the face of the late association president Go Gun Hui and his expression became colder in an instant.